Good evening. Welcome to the May 16, 2023 City Council meeting. The meeting is hereby called to order. Members of the public may attend this City Council meeting in person or may watch and listen remotely by viewing the meeting on Channel 8 WCTV and at the city's website at www.wayzata.org/WCTV. Public comment during the public forum and/or public hearing portions of the meeting may be provided in person at the meeting in advance or by logging into the Zoom call and raising your hand during the public hearing. When your name is called in the meeting, you will be seen and heard in our council chambers and the cable channel. You will be asked to unmute and then you may begin your comment. All public comments must include your full name and address. Second item on this evening's agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. I would ask everyone who is able to do so to please stand and follow along. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next on the agenda is the roll call. Please note that all members of the council are in attendance this evening. I'd also like to note that earlier this evening, the council participated in a workshop and discussed boat slip ordinance and policy, and also an update of the zoning study status and discussion of future priorities. Item number 4 on the agenda is to approve the agenda. Would someone care to make a motion to approve the agenda as is, or alternatively make any suggestions for changes?
So moved, Madam Mayor.
To approve the agenda as is. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? That motion passes. Next up this evening is the public forum. As a reminder for those members of the public in attendance this evening who are interested in speaking, we ask that you please provide your name and address, indicate if you are representing a group, and we also ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. If the item you wish to speak about is something that is on this evening's agenda, for those that are in person, we ask that you please fill out a form at the table at the back of the room and hand it to staff. For those that are watching via Zoom, please send a note via chat to staff and let them know which agenda item you'd like to speak about. And then we would also require that your camera is turned on when you speak. We have a number of people who are here this evening who will be addressing the council and the public. First up this evening is an update from Hennepin County Operations by Commissioner Chris Latondras, City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Similar to last year, we've invited Commissioner Latondras to attend and give us an update on all of what's going on with the county. He's graciously accepted, so we're happy to have him here. I'm just working on pulling up the PowerPoint, so 1 second.
Great. Well, I can get started while you pull that up. Good evening, Mayor Mouton, Council. It's my esteemed colleagues in local government. It's an honor to be with you here this evening for my annual Hennepin County update. Both members of the council I've met before, and welcome to new members as well. My name is Chris Latondras. I'm your Hennepin County Commissioner representing District 6, which includes my hometown of Hopkins, Edina, Minnetonka, Eden Prairie, and 12 cities around Lake Minnetonka, including the city of Wayzata. When I tell folks that I am their county commissioner, the most common question that I get is, what's a commissioner? And I get it. Hennepin County often flies under the radar, but we are actually Minnesota's second largest government, second only to the state, and largest local unit of government, which of course includes our cities, our school districts, and Minnesota's 87 counties. Next slide, please. On our board, there are 7 of us commissioners. It functions much like this council. Together, we steward a $2.7 billion annual budget across a broad range of topics: human services, public health, public safety, public works, resident services. That includes our libraries and our elections. And through our HRA, we also steward considerable investments in housing and economic development. We do this on behalf of the 1.26 million residents. That's 1 in 5 Minnesotans who call Hennepin County home. Next slide, please. It's a really big responsibility. And if there's one thing that I have learned serving our shared residents, it's that the only way that any of this is possible is through partnerships. And I promise to do my part to ensure that the partnership between the city of Wayzata and Hennepin County remains strong for years to come. So my goal tonight is to offer a brief snapshot of what your county government has been up to since we last connected a little over a year ago on a few key topics, including housing, public safety, our economic recovery, and to also make myself available at the end for any of the questions that you might have. So with that, we'll jump in first here on housing stability. We currently face an intersecting crisis of affordable housing and homelessness that has absolutely surged with the end of the federal eviction moratorium and the end of pandemic emergency rental assistance dollars. As you can see from this slide, 1 in 3 Hennepin County families are currently housing cost burdened. That means they pay more than a third of their income on their rent or their mortgage. And in probably the more troubling statistic hiding underneath this data, family homelessness has actually more than doubled since before the beginning of the pandemic. It's doubled over pre-pandemic levels. That's a parent and a child with no place to sleep at night. Next slide. We don't have to look very far to understand why this is happening. There are, as we sit here tonight, 73,000 extremely low income households in Hennepin County, and fewer than 15,000 units that are available to them that are affordable at that level. That's extremely low income. We're talking about 30% area median income and below. And that's a gap, about a 50,000 unit gap that directly corresponds to this surge that we're seeing in homelessness. Next slide. It's why Hennepin County invests more than $146 million annually across a whole continuum of resident housing needs and opportunities, from homeless shelters all the way up to affordable homeownership opportunities and everything in between. Next slide, please. And it's why with the American Rescue Plan, we've gone big on housing stability, garnering national attention, including from U.S. Housing and Urban Development Secretary Marcia Fudge. She invited us to D.C. recently, and in that meeting, she not only praised the scale of Hennepin County's investments, but some of the innovations that we've been able to offer as well, such as converting hotels into single-room homes and a Vivo Village, the first and I think only tiny indoor house village anywhere in the country. There is a lot more work to do, obviously, but I think all of us can be proud to live in a county that is looked to as a national leader on housing. Next slide. Just quickly, before we move on, I wanted to just spotlight a few of those housing investments right here in District 6. I won't go into any of these, but we've got an annual grants program where we administer some of these investments. Any developer that's in the affordable housing space or wants to get into that space, they should be in touch with my office, and we'll make sure that they're aware of how to navigate those opportunities. Next slide, please. Our next topic is on public safety. Did we miss a slide there? Can you go back one? There it is. I'm the vice chair of Hennepin's Law, Safety, and Justice Committee, and public safety remains a top priority of mine. I'm in frequent conversation with our chiefs, including Chief Schultz, we were just chatting earlier this evening, our new sheriff, DeWanna Witt, and I continue to learn from our officers and our first responders on the front lines through regular ride-alongs, including a recent ride-along here in Wayzata. With a workforce shortage that is affecting all of our departments and increased pressures to serve residents with mental and behavioral health challenges, it's critical we get these public servants the resources and support that they need to do their jobs with fidelity and with excellence. That's why we approved the Sheriff Office's recent request for 31 new deputies, 31 FTEs on top of their previous baseline. It's why we approved an $8.2 million investment to expand the North Metro Public Safety Training Facility in Maple Grove. That broke ground last year. It's just opened its doors, and we're going to do a ribbon cutting here, I think, in the next couple of weeks. Next slide, please. And it's also why we have moved with urgency to expand what I believe is one of the most promising public safety initiatives and partnerships anywhere in the nation. Our embedded social worker partnership that only happens in partnership with cities and local law enforcement. It started as a pilot in 2019 with just 5 social workers in 6 departments, and has now, as of 2023, expanded this year to 45 workers covering every single city and every department in Hennepin County, including the Wayzata Police Department, I believe in partnership with a few local other area police departments. It's a model that we have found and the evidence supports better meets the needs of residents in crisis, frees up our police to do critical police work, and it makes all of us more safe. I believe that that's good government in action. Next slide, please. While we're on this adjacent topic of mental health, I'm also proud to report that we're making big strides in addressing the mental health needs of our students. According to the CDC, more than 4 in 10 students feel persistently sad or hopeless, and 1 in 3 experience poor mental health. It's a painful trend that has only surged on the other side of the pandemic and during the pandemic. Through Hennepin County's school-based mental health partnerships, we are now providing services to more than 6,600 students annually. And then as of this year, the 2023 budget, we have expanded this programming to every single district, every school county-wide. It's a key policy priority that I've championed and that our board has supported. In the midst of this crisis that a lot of us are facing of loneliness and social disconnection, I think it's important for our students and young people to know that somebody cares about them, and I'm grateful for the partnerships with our schools that make this work possible. Next slide. Third and final spotlight, a full economic recovery means supporting our small businesses that are really the backbone of our community, and I know just absolutely vital to Wayzata. During the pandemic, Hennepin County provided $70 million countywide in grants to small businesses, including over $9.5 million across District 6 and 52 grants totaling nearly $600,000 in Wayzata alone. Next slide, Jeff. Thank you. But we know that our responsibility doesn't end here. It's why we've launched Elevate Hennepin. It's a resource hub connecting local entrepreneurs to expert advisors at no cost on a wide range of topics that you can see listed here across the bottom. And folks can visit elevatehennepin.org to learn more. Next slide. This is just one piece of a broader strategy that Hennepin is now growing to support entrepreneurs and businesses at every stage, including through a range of additional programming that you can see here. To date, over 2,300 businesses have been involved in this whole umbrella of Elevate programs, and more than 1,400 have accessed over 9,500 hours of free one-on-one advising. So whether you've got a new idea that you're looking to scale, or you're a $1 million a year business and you're looking for a cohort of your peers to engage with to figure out what it would mean to take that to the next level, we're here to meet you at every stage of that journey and help you thrive. Again, I think it's good government in action, those small business partnerships. One more thing, next slide, please, before I turn it back over to you. For your reference, our Public Works team just wanted me to include a list of current and future projects here around Lake Minnetonka. Again, I won't go through all of these, but I wanted to personally extend the thanks to the city of Wayzata for the partnerships with our Public Works teams that make these initiatives and projects possible. So with that, Mayor Mouton, I'll turn things back over to you and stand for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think we'll be going back to the Public Works slide.
Sure.
Certainly. That's always a topic of interest with construction. Questions for Commissioner Latondras from the council? Anything? No?
Thank you.
So I would, a couple of observations. I really like the slide with all the pictures with your colleagues when you were in DC. I had the opportunity to meet one of your fellow commissioners at an event in DC, invited by the White House to discuss the American Rescue Plan.
I saw that.
Yes.
Chair Fernando, I believe.
Yes, exactly. So it was too bad that our own commissioner couldn't be there, but it was a pleasure certainly getting to meet her. And then, I would just like to express our gratitude. Your partnership since you've been elected has been absolutely phenomenal. And for that, I thank you. We partner with Hennepin County for the library, and certainly the embedded social worker program, that pilot, having spoken with our police department, the just that resource available to them and to the community as a whole has really been invaluable. So, we'd like to thank you certainly and the county for that. And, being open to listening when we call about a trail that requires some maintenance or some of these other projects. You've always been there and listened. And, those of you in the room don't know this, but I did send an email to Commissioner Latondras after I had to go to the DMV a couple of times. at
Everybody loves the
Ridgedale.
DMV.
And yes, I did so with much trepidation, but it was bar none, and I don't do this often, send anybody an email to say thank you, but the best service, the most efficient service, it was actually a pleasure to go. And I don't think many people can say that about the motor vehicles. But yeah, so hats off to the leadership at the county level, but also at that office in particular. Wonderful staff and great service. So thank you for all you do.
Yeah, thanks so much for those really kind words, and the respect, admiration, and gratitude goes both ways. So
Absolutely.
it's a pleasure to serve together.
Well, we look forward to having you back soon, and thank you for being here this evening.
Yep, thanks everyone.
Thank you. All right. Well, we have another update this evening. Our next update is the 2023 Public Safety Initiatives update by our very own Chief of Police, Mark Schultz. City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll just mention that I agree with your comments about the Minnetonka DMV. I'd add that ours is pretty right up there in terms of customer service and everything.
Absolutely. It's not to diminish our own office. The only thing our office doesn't do,
Right.
they don't do driver's licenses, which is
Exactly.
why I had to go to Ridgedale. Otherwise,
It's in a different category, so
Exactly.
I want to make sure that it's clear
I
for
will
all
always
of us.
support our motor vehicles. Well, maybe we should start, handling driver's licenses.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Sorry about that. Chief Schultz is here to give us an update on, just a brief update on general crime trends in the state and the region. There's a lot in the news lately about the increase in crime and how it relates to Wayzata specifically. So he's going to talk about that and then just talk about this summer and what to expect along Lake Street.
Fantastic. Good evening, Chief.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, thank you for allowing me a few minutes of your time tonight to offer a brief public safety update. A few weeks ago, we actually had the opportunity to meet at a workshop, and I gave you a little bit more of a detailed overview of what I'm about to talk to about tonight. And I also met with the Panaway District Committee. But this tonight will be a bit of a synopsis of the data that was presented at that time. So I'm sure most are aware that over the last several years, crime, including certain types of violent crime, has been increasing across Minnesota, and in particular across our 7-county metro area. The state of Minnesota's uniform crime reports from 2021, okay, bear with me, show an increase of 22% over those from 2020 as it relates to violent crime alone. So that's concerning. I only reference 2021's data because 2022's UCR data is not yet available, so it's usually a year behind. The media has highlighted recently that particular importance in these statistics lies in the number of auto thefts and carjackings in particular in Minneapolis compared to those same statistics through the rest of Minnesota. Now, Wayzata is certainly not immune to these trends. We simply need to be as prepared and proactive as we can to deter these trends from affecting our community. We do, however, have Wayzata's incident data back from 2022. And as you might expect, we too have seen a slight uptick in crime as well. As you can see by these statistics, 2022 brought a notable increase in a few areas. Particularly, you'll see a 77% increase in assaults. Now, most of those assaults were, the caveat is most of those assaults were domestic-related assaults. And the other area of concern is the increase in damage to property cases at 150% over 2021. Now, as you might expect, those damage to property cases they were really heavily impacted by the amount of graffiti that we saw across the city last summer. So I am happy to say, though, that with this increase comes a healthy clearance rate. We always like to focus on that. We were able to identify many of the actors related to these graffiti cases, and were eventually able to somewhat curb that behavior throughout the summer. So now, preliminary statistics on the other side of the column here from this year show we're likely on track to keep pace with 2022 in a few regards, most evident with vehicle thefts and assaults. Now, this slide illustrates just some notable types of incidents that, we had in recent years as it relates to both adults and as it relates to juveniles. Really, it shows us what we might expect in crimes related to adults as they compare to crimes related to juveniles. Of particular note, we've seen an emergence of what are known as Orbeez guns. It's basically a toy gun, think an airsoft or paintball gun, that shoots a gel projectile, sort of like a paintball gun. We've had a few cases of kids in vehicles shooting randomly at pedestrians as they drive by, and again, in most of these cases, we've been able to identify these individuals responsible and hold them accountable. So, if we look at where we've been, we must look at where we are going. So, what have we done and what are we going to do to be prepared and proactive moving forward? The steps we've taken to continue to take are really about creating force multipliers. It's difficult to have one officer on duty with the responsibility of answering calls in Wayzata and Long Lake, and in addition to that, effectively and proactively patrol those communities as well. Well, we know that there may be times moving forward where having one officer on at a time is unavoidable. It's going to be a reality at certain times, but we've taken some steps to bolster our street strength and productivity in some creative ways. As each of you has supported, we're in the process of putting more officers on the street. We're also placing those additional resources in areas that will make the most impact. Much of what we've heard as far as from the public in terms of concerns lies in the areas of traffic safety, particularly as it relates to our busy areas of the city. Lake Street, of course, Wayzata Boulevard, Central Avenue, Highway 12, around the areas around schools and churches. Those are all of the areas that we frequently get the most number of complaints regarding traffic safety. I'm happy to say that we have received a grant from the Department of Public Safety this year to fund a dedicated traffic safety officer. Officer Natalie Kulkas, she's going to be embarrassed that I bring her name up tonight, but she's done a fantastic job and has really hit the ground running this year. She's leading the charge as we try to be proactive and present in as many areas as we can throughout the year, but especially during our busy times. Additionally, this week we've got 2 more officers going through bike patrol certification. We actually have an in-house bike patrol instructor, Officer Josh Vogel. I talked to him today. All of his students are a little banged up and bruised up and sunburned and whatnot, but to have an in-house bike patrol instructor is great. He's holding a 4-day class in Long Lake this week as we speak. And I think having more cops trained will allow us to have better presence in busy areas and places where you really can't maneuver squads as well. And it's also going to allow us to have be more approachable by our citizens and engage more with them. We also intend to continue our Zero Tolerance Month in June again this year, and we hope to pair our efforts with some directed patrols and TZD or Towards Zero Death initiatives that you see on the slide, where we bring officers in from other jurisdictions, other agencies to help us during, provide traffic enforcement during specific times, whether it's a special event or a holiday or those times where we may just, really need extra help. And you may recall seeing some new electronic responsive speed signs on Lake Street last fall. We'll be bringing those back, and they will be mobile, so they can be moved around the city and be utilized in various areas, so they can best collect data and show us where the true areas of habitual offenses are occurring, and then we can use that data to focus on those in particular areas. On your way back into town, you may have also seen signs reminding visitors that we do, in fact, have a noise ordinance to help address some of the loud muffler complaints that we get. And the city staff is discussing ways to address the crowds that we've seen gather, particularly at the Mill Street ramp and at the beach. We're looking at ways to limit the kinds of traffic and the times of traffic to particularly the upper deck of the Mill Street ramp. And certainly discussions have been taking place about the possibility of a gated entrance. But until that becomes a reality, though, our officers are going to be focusing their focus patrol areas on some of those problem areas. Finally, this spring, we've completed the installation of 9 automated license plate readers around the city. Our flock automated license plate readers, or ALPRs as we call them, have been strategically placed around the perimeter of the city. Remember I mentioned force multipliers earlier. Those are our heaviest traveled and most vulnerable areas, so we figured those were great places to put them. They can be moved. We will adjust as necessary. But these ALPRs read license plates on vehicles that have what's called an NCIC alert attached to them. It's through the BCA. When a plate gets flagged, it goes into the NCIC system. And then they notify our officers via an alert on their cell phones when the vehicle's seen on the street. So, as you recall from one of the previous slides, stolen vehicles and carjackings have skyrocketed in the metro area, and particularly in Minneapolis. So when a stolen car comes into our town, the only intent that those occupants have is to commit crime here. And we want to be notified when they're here. Again, force multipliers. These flock ALPRs have not only been instrumental in alerting us when stolen vehicles come into town, but they also alert us to vehicles related to Amber Alerts and protection orders, missing persons, and other types of like predatory offender alerts. We're working on getting them hooked up with the BCA so we can get warrant hits on the registered owners of those vehicles. But it's a relatively new technology and integration. So they've also proven revolutionary in how we investigate crimes that do occur. In just 6 short months, we've used the flock ALPRs to solve crimes related to assaults, residential burglaries, catalytic converter thefts, street racing on Highway 12, and we've recovered several stolen vehicles. So, as you can see, all these efforts, from additional staffing to specialized assignments, utilizing technology or increasing communication, all of these allow our officers to cast what we term larger nets. By utilizing these force multipliers, I truly believe we're coming up with the most efficient and effective ways to keep our community safer. And that concludes my presentation on public safety. I'd be happy to stand for any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions for Chief Schultz? Chief, thank you very much. You have come forward certainly in the last year with some very creative solutions. And on behalf of the council and the community, we thank you and your officers for, their hard work, their professionalism, their commitment and dedication. There aren't a lot of communities that say wholeheartedly that they stand behind their police department of late. But I'm proud to say that we up here as the leaders of this community, staff and the community certainly support everything that you're doing. And I'm so very appreciative you listen to concerns, complaints, with, without judgment, and you try and always find solutions for how we can continue to be the community we've been, which is a safe one and one that people are proud to call home. So thank you for all of that work.
And we thank you for your support.
Thank you very much. All right, we have another item in our public forum this evening, and that is the introduction of our Wayzata High School Compass student. City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to call Joe Petrak up to the podium, please. So, Madam Mayor, Council, Joe is a student, a senior at Wayzata High School, and similar to what I and some of our staff have done over the past few years, we've brought on a mentee to mentor through the Wayzata High School Compass program. The program is a profession-based learning program available for seniors. Its 4 core principles are a team-taught environment, college credit for every student, business partnerships, and then the mentors are assigned to each student. So it's a cool program where for us, we get to get out in the community, communicate and interact with parts of the population, specifically the youth that we might not otherwise partner with. And we get to try to pump them up about local government, of course, because it's pretty cool and we get to have pretty awesome impacts to our communities. For them, of course, they just get a good experience, a real life kind of business experience, whether it's on the public or private side, that'll help them in their career and hopefully guide them a little bit more as they enter their next stage. So I asked Joe to come just to introduce himself, speak really highly about me and his experience with me.
It'll be a short speech. I'm just kidding.
He's a good communicator. It's going to be very clear. He only needs a few words, And proud to say that Joe is going to the University of Minnesota, my alma mater, and many of probably people in this room. So he's going to be a gopher next year. So Joe, want to talk a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Joe Petrak. Obviously, as Mr. Dahl stated, I'm a student at Wayzata High School, and I'm very fortunate to have Mr. Dahl as my mentor. He's a great communicator and has taught me a lot about what a city manager does and what he's able to do in his day-to-day life and how he's able to help people. So I'm very fortunate for the opportunity to spend time with him, and yeah, thank you for having me here today.
Oh, it's great to have you, Joe. How long is your program?
Yeah, so it's a full semester in school, so we've been doing it since the last week of January, and it goes to the first week of June, and it's half the day, so 3 hours in class every day gets a little lengthy, but it's worth it, so.
Oh, fantastic. And you're graduating soon, it sounds like?
Yep, yes I am.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Any big plans for the summer?
I'm working at Woodhill Country Club as a seasonal grounds maintenance person, so I'm excited for that.
Did you hear that, Bennett? Bennett's with our Public Works.
Okay.
Well, that's wonderful. Does anybody have any questions of Joe? No? All right.
I'll ask one.
Yes, please.
What are you going to be studying at the U?
Yep, so I'm planning on studying finance right now with probably a minor in accounting, but that could change. I'm not for sure on it yet.
Good. And do you have any idea where you want to end up in 4 years?
That's a great question. I've thought about financial advising maybe, but completely everything's on the table, so.
Okay, study hard for the CPA exam.
Well, you could stick around for budget season here at the city. Very boring. Go to Woodhill. Much more enjoyable.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Joe.
Checks in the mail, Joe. Thanks.
Yeah. That's fantastic. All right. So we do have one blue card here from Michael Travanti. We do have this item on our agenda, so would you mind if we address it when we get to that agenda item? Perfect, thank you so much. All right, do we have anybody on Zoom for public forum, any public comments?
Madam Mayor, we do not.
Okay, fantastic. Then we'll move on to our next item, which is new agenda items for the council to propose for discussion at a later meeting. Anything? No? Yes, Alex.
Madam Mayor, I did not bring this up with you beforehand, so I apologize for that, but an idea I had while I was studying the council packet and some of the other things involved in is I'd like to explore the idea of the city, the council, putting together maybe some sort of an ad hoc committee to think about public art in the city. We're doing a lot of development. We're doing studies on Wayzata Boulevard corridor and design standards and so on. And I'm thinking that maybe we should have a special group that just looks at where are places in the city we could do public art, what will be involved in it, who would pay for it, what the standards are. I just think it's something the city could do to enhance the charm and just make Wayzata a very special place. I don't know if that is a council item or something we do under the strategic plan, but I just wanted to bring it up tonight.
I appreciate that, Alex, because we do have a number of areas where we've brought up our desire as a city to incorporate public art in different forms. And is that something that the council would like to explore further at some point, maybe at our strategic plan seems appropriate in terms of prioritization? City Manager, what are your thoughts?
I think that's a great idea. I was excited when Councilmember Plekish mentioned this, but we're going to be talking about strategic priorities in the near future. This would be a big endeavor. I think it would have a lot of support, but it should be in the context of all the other things, and that's timely because we're going to be talking about that in a couple months.
Perfect. Okay, let's do that. Anybody else? Nothing? All right. Next up then is the consent agenda. We have a number of items. Bear with me while I read through them. I think I'll read them off the screen if we can scroll that up just a titch. Thank you. We have approval of the City Council workshop and regular meeting minutes of May 2nd, 2023, and the reconvened Local Board of Appeal and Equalization hearing minutes of April 19, 2023. We have approval of the check register, approval of municipal licenses, receipt of police activity report, receipt of building activity report, approval of professional services agreement with Alpha Video and Audio Inc. for City Council Chambers audiovisual equipment improvements, adoption of Resolution 31-2023 establishing a tree and plantings fund, approval of engagement letter with Baker Tilly to conduct a compensation study, receipt of memorandum of understanding with the Wayzata Conservancy for Panaway Phase 2A maintenance and operations, approval of professional services agreement with WSB for design services related to the replacement of the Broadway Avenue Wayzata Boulevard traffic signal system, and lastly, approval of second reading and adoption of Ordinance 826, amending Chapters 902, 916, 917, 919, and 920 of the zoning ordinance definitions and performance requirements updates. Do any members of the council wish to pull an item for further discussion? Yes, Alex.
Madam Mayor, we spoke about this briefly before the meeting. I would like to pull item G, adoption of Resolution 31-2023, establishing a tree and plantings fund, just as an advance. One of the items where it listed uses of the funds that would be used for people that can't plant a tree would be to actually remove or maintain a tree, and it doesn't seem right to me that if somebody's paying money because they couldn't plant a tree, that we end up using that money to remove a tree. So it's something I think we should talk about separately.
Okay, very good. Anybody else have any other items that they would like to pull? All right. City Manager, would you like us to pull that and add it to the end of the agenda, or is this something that you think we can just hash out in the here and now?
I think it's cleaner if it just moves to the end of the agenda.
Okay, perfect. Let's do that. We'll pull item G for discussion later. Someone could please remind me. Let's see. Okay. Sorry while I make notes here. Item G. Okay. All right, seeing that nobody else wants to pull any other items, would someone care to make a motion to approve the consent agenda items A through K with the exception of item G that will be discussed at a later time, later this evening?
Madam Mayor, I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Councilmember Plekish. And a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and first and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. We will move on to new business. First item under new business is to consider adoption of Resolution 29-2023, approving rooftop mechanical design deviations and First Amendment to Development Agreement for 900 Wayzata Boulevard East. City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Assistant Planner Quarles is going to walk us through this item.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
There we go. Good evening, council, community. Tonight we'll be talking about the adoption of Resolution 29-2023, approving some rooftop mechanical design deviations and the First Amendment to the Development Agreement for the project at 900 Wayzata Boulevard East. For some background, this is a project that the council has seen before. This was a pretty significant mixed-use redevelopment project that the council approved in 2022. The project consists of a residential building with apartments and townhomes, an office building, and a separate bank with drive-through service. The plans that were approved at that time included a lot of detail, but they did not include detailed mechanical equipment information. And then something to keep in mind as we move forward, the deviations that we're speaking about are just for the bank and office buildings, because those are the ones that are up for permitting first. At this time, we're not anticipating any deviations for the residential building. For a little zoning background, our zoning map is about to be updated as soon as the final plat for this goes through, but the parcel was formerly C1 and is now R5, C1, and C3, as you can see in this image of the site plan. And then just to note once again, that final plat filing is in progress, so this is what it will look like, but not for a couple days here. And then in terms of our land use, the entire area is still guided mixed-use commercial residential, even after all of the work that was done last year. For some context, here's an aerial view of the site as it is today, and then the first image up top there is if you're standing on Wayzata Boulevard and looking south, and then the bottom image is if you're standing down on Superior and looking north up at the current office building. The application requests in front of us are just for the office and bank buildings, and they only relate to mechanical equipment. The applicant is seeking deviations to put rooftop equipment instead of equipment on the ground or equipment that is tucked into the building in some way. Those deviations are on the office building, 3 separate units, all of which have oversized footprints as they relate to our regulation, and all of which are oversized in terms of height. And then similar for the bank building, that building has a couple more units, but they do also come over on footprint and on height. Just for a little bit of context, each of our design districts treat mechanical equipment a little bit differently. On Lake Street, we don't allow any rooftop equipment at all. In the Bluff District, we also don't allow rooftop equipment. And then on the Wayzata Boulevard District, we have limited rooftop equipment, and we'll be going over what those standards are shortly. This is a reference slide that we'll be able to come back to as needed. For the office building, there are a couple of renderings in front of you. All of these are have the mechanical equipment included on the top of the building. If you're standing on the ground on Wayzata Boulevard, you should not be able to see that mechanical equipment, but we also asked them to include that bird's eye view so you can still get an idea of what it would look like. Our code standard for mechanical equipment on rooftops in the Wayzata Boulevard district is limiting those units to 3 feet tall. The proposed units on the office building are about 6 feet tall. We also limit the square footage of each of those units to about 9 square feet, which is pretty tiny. It's a 3 by 3 foot square. And the proposed mechanical equipment is a lot larger. It's a total of 500 square feet of mechanical equipment, 302 of which is a central unit, and then there are 2 other units on that rooftop that you can see there that are 99 square feet each. Other than that, they meet our other standards that we've laid out for rooftop equipment. To note some additional detail, all of those units have metal screening around them, which is painted the color limestone. There's an example of that in your packet. The height from the grade plane is 39 feet, 11 inches. The limit is 40 feet. There was a bit of a clarification for the grade plane during finalization of plans. If you may recall, this entire project is on a hill, and so we have to be really careful with how we calculate 0 in terms of what height is. When I say clarification, there wasn't anything, they're not doing anything, suspicious with the grading around the building or anything like that. It's just a more precise way of calculating that average around the building. There's some more materials for that in the packet if it interests you, but it was vetted by staff very thoroughly, and we're satisfied with how they've calculated that. For this building, there were, of course, alternative locations explored that could comply with the design standards. They looked at putting it on the ground, potentially maybe tucked into the interior of the building, or a roof inset. All of those were found to be an inferior option to the rooftop mechanicals instead.
Could you clarify that a little bit? Inferior in what way?
I'm actually going to leave that to the applicant to talk through their design process for that. For the bank building, these are also not visible from the street. They're much smaller units. Again, tucked towards that middle of the roof so that they're not up against an edge that you can see. They're just barely a little bit too tall for our height regulations. We have that 3-foot limit. These units are proposed to be 3 foot 6 inches. And then 24 square feet each instead of that 9 square foot limit. And then in terms of our other rooftop mechanical standards, they do meet those. Again, alternative locations were explored for each of those, but this particular parcel, if this group remembers, was very tight. Almost all of it is sidewalk or planned in some way, and I believe some mechanical equipment is already on the ground. I just don't think that they could put all of it there. And then this is a 1-story building, so trying to look at options for the interior or sort of insetting into the roof was also tough. The design standards do have a lot of notes on rooftop equipment within our design standards handbook. This was a document that came out of the design standards creation process. And it notes that if you have necessary equipment, it's really important to locate it where it won't detract from the architecture of the building. Every effort should be made to conceal those pieces of equipment from view. To the maximum extent feasible, if you do have rooftop equipment, you should be clustering it in the least visually obtrusive locations. For instance, in this case, it would be the center of the roof. And then any equipment larger than these standards, and this is obviously the tenet that this is in the greatest violation of, must be located in the building interior or on grade in the side or rear yard and concealed from view. So that's what the deviation here is for, is that equipment is on the rooftop instead. The Planning Commission had a robust discussion on this. They started by talking about comparing the height of these buildings to the current building by elevation. That proposed office building is about the same as that current Wells Fargo building. So if you need a little bit of a reference, they're about the same height. But as we know, the office building is going to be set a lot closer to the street. So it will feel different, but in terms of the actual location and space that they occupy, pretty similar. They had a bit of a discussion about the timing of the mechanical equipment design within the entitlement process. Why wasn't this discussed earlier? That's within the minutes, and I'm also happy to answer questions about that. They talked about the location on the center of the roof, on the proposed screening. They were very much in favor of that lack of visibility from the street. They also agreed with the applicant that preservation of that planned green space around the office building in particular by not putting mechanical equipment in it was a big priority for them. And then just considering, is that design standard itself practical? Is adherence to that design standard leading to maybe a worse outcome for this design? And out of that discussion, they ended up voting 5-0 to recommend approval of these deviations. In terms of neighborhood notification, fairly standard. Notice was published in the newspaper. The applicant sent out their own neighborhood notification letter. We don't require a neighborhood meeting for design deviations alone. And then in terms of public comments, we had one public comment in favor of the deviations. That comment is both included in the packet, and that commenter also came up and spoke at the meeting and delivered their comment that way as well. And then the other part of the resolution today is an amendment to the development agreement. This is purely an administrative update. The original development agreement references approval resolutions that enable the project to happen. This would be one of those resolutions that enables the project to happen. So we're amending the development agreement to include this resolution that you're considering today. And that's, as always, council approval only. The Planning Commission does not look at amendments to the development agreement. And with that, our motion would be to adopt Resolution 29, 2023, approving rooftop mechanical design deviations and the First Amendment to the Development Agreement for 900 Wayzata Boulevard East.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Quarles. Would the applicant like to come forward? Good evening.
Hi, good evening. Hello again. I'm Matt Mathune. I'll keep it very, very brief. And I'm just going to read. You'll have to excuse me. I got my eyes dilated today, so if I fudge anything, I'm sorry. But I'll just read through what we discussed with the Planning Commission, and then if you have further questions for me, great. Or also Tanek, the architect here. So a quick recap of how we got here. Language was added to the code a little over 2 years ago, restricting rooftop units to 9 square feet, 3 feet in height, and no more than 25% of the total surface area of the roof. This summer marks 3 years that we've been working on this plan, with particular effort and resources having been put into the project since gaining approval about 10 months ago. A few months ago, while working toward the final permit, our commercial architect, Tanek, saw this language in the code, realizing the impracticability of the 2 components, height and square feet. For those not familiar with mechanicals, 3 feet in height and 9 square feet would be appropriate dimensions for a modestly sized single-family home. We've researched all available units, and there are none that comply for a commercial structure of this size or anything close to this size. But it is noteworthy that the 3rd component, the percent of rooftop surface area, we easily comply with at only 3% of the allowed 25%. That language makes complete sense. And if we were to comply, we'd have 513 units on the rooftop. So to give you an idea of how this language reads. Tanek, our architect, immediately raised the issue with the city, and we were hopeful that we would be able to move forward with an administrative amendment, as our plan was to break ground on April 3rd. But we were told that we'd need to go through the city approval process again. Please keep in mind our office building does not require any other deviations, CUPs, or flexibility from the code. As planned all along, pedestrians and drivers will not see the rooftop units because of our 42-inch parapet, and it's only the residents of our own development that would have a view. But we now plan to shield an eye-level view with screening immediately around the units as well, as you just saw. The only alternative would involve units at ground level for everyone to see and hear instead of the beautiful landscaping that is planned now. But after lengthy research and many conversations with our tenants, including our main tenant that we've been working with for about 3 years, this plan would not work. And it has become clear that the plan in front of you with the RTUs is the only viable path forward for this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions of the applicant? No? Yes, Molly.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I have been curious where you are putting the mechanical equipment for the apartment building, just for reference.
Yeah, so, and others can speak more intelligently, but those are going to be units more like single-family home units and more of them, so the dimensions won't be the same. So that's, and if anyone wants to speak to this, please feel free.
But they will be on the roof or
Yes.
within, confined to each unit? 'Cause
They will be
we're
on the
afraid
roof.
of-
I'm going to let
or-
Mark here talk to that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Good evening. If you could introduce yourself with your name and address, please.
Yep, Mark McLean, 4296 Gadwall Court, Eagan, Minnesota. And I work for Matt as a development consulting representative. Kind of simply put, the mechanical systems for the residential property will be a heat pump system, very efficient, very sustainable system that'll be internal to the building. The condensers themselves are small, kind of envision a mini split, small condenser, smaller than even a single family home. And what we're doing is kind of lining those in the middle. And so those will be ganged with the units. They're within the 9-foot, I believe, assistant planner and our team, ESG, is particularly the architect on that one, vetted that pretty substantially because there was we were working through different options there and wanted to conform with that piece of the code.
So that system is specifically for residential? You couldn't apply that same system or philosophy to?
Yeah, so those condensers, particularly the heat is handled in the unit in a different system, in that heat pump system. Particular to the condensers, which provides the tempered and cooled air. To do that, I think you kind of reference it. We had our mechanical folks look at it, and it would take about 500 on that roof, and so it would just get to be very obstructive.
Understood.
This is condensing it to a couple hundred square feet in the center, about 3% of that area. So.
Okay, thanks.
Very good. Is that, so I'm sorry, did somebody else have a question?
Whenever you're done, I just have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Thanks, guys. Help me explain, on the bank building, why are there 5 units on that building? It seems like a large quantity for such a small building.
Yeah, and I wish we had our MEP professional and design build folks in the room with us tonight. I think overall it's a different system up there, and it's a smaller, it's about getting that accurate kind of coverage and tonnage on there, right? And it's a different system, less efficient, but I think overall on a per square foot basis, it's smaller.
And how many square feet is that building?
Yeah.
It's about 5,000, 2 stories? It's only a 1-story? At first glance, when I first saw it, it just seems like a significant amount of rooftop units for a building of that size. So I'd like to understand the data more as to why such a large quantity. And is it only taking care of the bank building, or is it functioning for other buildings as well?
Just the bank building, and I would say part of that, you start with those tenant needs, and they'll kind of spec what their needs are for the volume of space, and that's all part of the work that goes into producing their space and their lease, right? We did negotiate, I think, very collaboratively with that tenant to really challenge some of those assumptions and get that brought in a little bit. And again, I'm quite outside of my lane right now because it really is a direct mechanical engineer and design build situation. So we're working kind of in tandem with those 3 legs to make sure it's appropriately sized, not oversized. There was a fair amount of collaboration and negotiation on that, but they could give you a better answer on why those particular units work most efficiently for that volume of space.
And I may be, excuse me, I may be able to speak to that as well. Megan Rogers, Larkin Hoffman, on behalf of Methuen Enterprises, 8300 Normandale Boulevard. So when we were working with our bank tenant on this property, the reason that they need those 5 units is actually in relationship to how the vault is set up. And so in terms of how you cool and provide full oxygenation for their vault system, there are increased requirements that are mandatory for how they build out their systems and their actual uses for their bank branch offices. So that's unique to that building, a unique need to meet those tenant needs.
And one other thing, I think just getting to your point about the number of units, going back to the office building, like Mark and I just said, you could split it up and have about 500 units up there, but it just, it would not be practical at all. And, the service area, I think is key here, how you're allowed up to 25%, but we're about 3% of the actual surface area.
So I'd like to make just one statement, Mayor, and then I'll be done.
Yes, please, go ahead.
At the meeting that we had last time with you, I asked a very specific question. And the question was, where would the rooftop mechanicals be going? And I was told at that time, on the record, that they would all be internal in the building. So when I saw this, I was quite shocked. And so I don't know where the change went. And then I'll ask staff later. I wasn't aware that there was any mechanicals that were also going to be outside the building. So this really surprised me because I asked that question specifically.
Yeah.
I don't know, I really don't recollect, but we've all along had the 42-inch parapet to shield the rooftop units specifically. So I don't know who said that about the units being internal, but our plan all along is the rooftop units and having this parapet shield them. And so, I'm kind of the same as you because the last 2 months have been pretty, painful. When we were trying to break ground April 3rd, and this language, we were all taken aback by this language because it's pretty much impossible to achieve. And so I think we were all in this room either not understanding the language or not knowing it, frankly. So I'm kind of in the same boat.
I remember specifically who answered the question, but I won't state that tonight.
So I think I do remember this statement because of the height variance on the other building. And it was in fear of, and for clarification of, this is all we're asking for, right? We're not coming back for anything else, because we have had that happen on occasion. So to Councilmember Iverson's point, I think that was a little bit of a surprise. I would like to just, for clarification, everything that's being requested is on the roof. Is there additional equipment that is going to be on the ground? Because I didn't believe so, but then maybe I misunderstood Councilmember Iverson's comment.
There's no equipment proposed for the ground. It's all proposed to be on the roof currently.
Okay.
Then I misheard you, because in a statement that you made during the presentation, you had said some mechanicals are already placed on the ground. Are there any mechanicals on the ground at all?
Not in this plan. I may have mentioned it in relation to the current office building.
Okay, maybe that's the interpretation then. Okay, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for the clarification. And then to the question I posed to Ms. Quarles with regard to, I don't remember the exact verbiage you used. It wasn't ideal to put the mechanicals on the inside. Forgive me if I am misquoting you. Were those your words?
Inferior?
Inferior. Thank you. Could you speak to that a little bit? Why that's considered inferior?
Yeah, so putting them, this project is very important to me, to us, to so many people, I hope to think. And putting these units on the ground to see and hear, when our plan all along is to make it as beautiful as possible, landscaped, walking. It just honestly was a non-starter to me, but we've also realized that it's pretty much impossible to achieve. We definitely know that for the bank building. There's nowhere to put it, and there's no basement. And the office building, it'd just be ugly.
So there's nowhere inside the buildings as designed where it could house the mechanical equipment, or was it never intended to be?
It was never intended, never planned. But also, if you were to put it in the basement of the office building, you'd still have to have the condenser outside. Is that so? So no matter what, you're dealing with this big thing.
Okay, thank you. Could we go a little bit back to what our code or our design standards state? I'm not really clear on the 9 square feet. That doesn't sound like you could do much of anything, and especially for an office building. So could you maybe explain to the council how that works, what it includes?
I'll speak to what I can. The design standards discussion and passage happened just before I started working at this job, but I have been here for the implementation. As I understand it, we don't allow mechanical equipment in our other 2 design standards districts. We say that all mechanical equipment needs to be on the ground, tucked into the building, not visible, all of these things noted here. And so those buildings just have to comply with that or seek a deviation. In the case of Wayzata Boulevard, as I've heard the discussion described, it sounds like there were some allowances granted for, say you did have some new residential buildings that needed to have, an AC unit on the roof or something like that. I don't think, people putting together the code at the time were looking to have deviations for every single use like that. We just talked about the residential building, maybe having some AC type units on top. Those aren't a big deal. So there's a little bit of an exception carved out for those because you're on Wayzata Boulevard, you're on top of the hill. A lot of these are not going to be visible from the street or from higher up the hill because there's nowhere higher up. But anything outside of that, as I understand it, is encouraged to be on the ground, behind the building, tucked in, that sort of thing. This is a tough site for that specifically, in part because we have seen a lot of focus on the landscaping specifically, but also because this office building has 3 front yards. In a lot of other developments that might front Wayzata Boulevard, there's a back that you can tuck all the things you don't want to see. This development is really viewed from every single side all the time and doesn't have that luxury. I think the standard in general is don't put your mechanical equipment on the roof unless it's something small. This particular application is seeking a deviation from that.
Okay. Across the street from this site, on Wayzata Boulevard, what is the maximum height for that zoning?
If that were to redevelop,
Correct.
3 stories, unless someday you make it more. Sorry, I made a joke. Unless someday you make it more.
Time and place. No, I'm just teasing. Okay, so, and the reason I asked the question, right, I mean, it's the view down, right? So if it's zoned for 35 feet, the intent and purpose of this is to shield view. Okay, that's helpful to understand.
If you were to-
Primarily with the bank building as opposed with the office building.
And I'll note that, I think there's really only one property over there that if it were to redevelop, it would be an issue, and that would be the Legion. The other ones are either already developed or that apartment building there sits very low on that parcel. So it's really just that Legion building, but they have the parapets, and then they also have that additional screening immediately around the units as well, which has the added benefit of shielding their future, apartment tenants from seeing that as well.
How tall is the screening that's proposed? And what materials are proposed for that?
42 inches. Yeah. This is Nat from Tannic, the architect.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Name
Nat
and
with
address.
Tannic. Sorry.
Sorry, name and address, please.
Nat with Tannic Architects, 118 East 26th Street. Thank you. So the parapet is 42 inches around the whole perimeter, which is matching the building. The screening directly around the units, I think, is 7 feet tall, and it's a metal to look like, stone or whatever, but it's just metal panel. And that would allow, the intention of that is, above and beyond, so you won't be able to see the units from the ground from anywhere. But if perhaps across the street was developed, you'd basically be seeing a finished material already. So we're really covering kind of all angles of that.
It allows for ongoing access to those.
Yep, so there's
mechanicals.
access panels that are on those as well, so.
Maintenance of screening for this type of application? I mean, it's metal. If it started to rust or anything else and did not match, would the city have any recourse?
I'm not sure if we have recourse above and beyond what the building code would require in terms of basic maintenance.
But I think the metals that we are using are high quality, and again, the building itself and the ownership group here owning it for long term, I think all of those things would suggest that it's going to be maintained in a beautiful way, so.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any further questions? No? All right, well, thank you very much. Appreciate your time and the additional information. All right, I will turn it back to the council for discussion. Who would like to begin?
Madam Mayor, I'll go ahead and begin. I've got some notes here.
Thank you, Alex.
Just as a math problem, this 9-foot restriction seems very curious to me. I think we must have made a mistake or something there. If you had a mechanical that was in fact 9 square feet and it was 25% of the roof, you'd have a whopping 27 square foot building, which is impossible. So there's something wrong with that number. But as far as my notes here, first off, I'd like to commend the Planning Commission. I think they did a masterful job in looking at all the details, and we had all the notes here, and I agree with them. The zoning for these kinds of things is essentially established for sightline conditions, and this doesn't seem to be a problem for sightlines anywhere currently, so I don't see any issue there. It is complying with the spirit of the zoning. Let's see here. I would like to comment that again, the 9-foot restriction is exceedingly small and not really something we could go with. I would comment that the design of development with this Methuen has been exceedingly well thought out from beginning to end, which is one reason it passed through the Planning Commission and the Council on one pass. So I would commend you for the amount of time and effort you've spent on designing everything, thinking of everything, and you're to be commended for that. I don't think this will have any effect on adjacent properties, and let's see here. And there were no comments from anybody that were opposed, so I am very much in favor of doing this.
Great, thanks, Alex. Any other? Jeff, would you like to go next?
Comment that I concur with Alex, and I concur with the Planning Commission's report. I do think maybe there is something we need to look at in the code, and that can go in our strategic plan, one of our items in that. I do want to note that on the bank building, there'd be 4 sides that would basically be public, and so it'd be really hard to put something on the ground there. And on the office building, I don't have it in front of me, but Planner Coral said there were 3 public sides, so it is visible, very, very visible. So I am okay with it.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Molly? Okay.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm in agreement with my colleagues who've spoken prior to me. I think it seems really reasonable. Not only with that office building would you have public on all 3 sides, but I think the other side is a lot line. So I think there would be some sort of setback rule or variance needed. So this all seems really reasonable, and thanks to these 2 who made great points, and I agree with them, so I support this application.
Great, thanks, Molly. Kathy?
So I'm going to be the minority. Couple of reasons. I think that a project of this scale, there could have been some thought put in on the very front end to how you do this internally, how you use part of this building to take those off the rooftop. And I 100% remember asking the question and being told that they would not be on the rooftops. So based off of that, I'm very principle-based, and again, I was shocked to see this, and so I cannot get behind it just based off of that.
Okay, thank you. You know, I too was surprised. You know, there were a lot of requests, a lot of asks of the council and of the Planning Commission, and then subsequently of the council. You know, the last thing that council wants to have to address is scope creep as we move through a project. We like to consider a project in its totality. And so, you know, when we have situations like these that arise, they are uncomfortable. But by the same token, they do occur, and sometimes there are circumstances that are beyond our control. You know, I think it's an unfortunate situation. However, I would say that I am pleased with the fact that the shielding will be there. I think that that is very important, and also that we are still staying below the maximum height. There is no height variance or request associated with it. It's really, and I know that the applicant and the architects and the team are very committed to having a great project, right? I would just caution I am concerned if we get to the 35 feet with the bank building by the boulevard, that it will not necessarily be a great vantage point for any potential future development. But please think about that as you look to, you know, what materials are being used. And I would have liked to have limited that. You know, if it was if the bank building was 35 feet, the other building would be 35 feet, and we wouldn't be discussing this as much. But we are very sensitive to that. I too am my brain is still going around on the 9 square feet and the 20%. Unless we were trying to just automatically preclude anything being on top of there, which maybe that's what the intention was, but I don't understand the calculations either. All that being said, you know, I'm just going to point to what my fellow council members have said with regard to the reasonableness of the request, and am in favor of this as well, and would like to thank the applicant, you know, for their patience as we move through this with new design standards. and certainly with the Planning Commission and staff for the work that they've done on this as well. All right, if we could move to the motion, please. So we have a motion before us to adopt Resolution 29-2023, approving the rooftop mechanical design deviations and First Amendment to Development Agreement for 900 Wayzata Boulevard East. Who would like to make that motion?
Madam Mayor, I'd like to make that motion.
Thank you, Alex. And a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
The motion carries. Thank you very much. All right. Look at that, I almost checked off the second item under new business, and we haven't talked about it yet. Oh, my apologies. All right, our next item this evening is item 8B, to consider approval of the first reading of ordinance 825, approving zoning text amendments to Chapter 936, Tree Preservation Ordinance, Chapter 918, Fencing and Screening, and Chapter 902, Rules and Regulations. City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's a mouthful. Our Parks planner, Nick Keyser, is going to walk us through this one with the help of our city forester, Bennett Myron. I think Nick is going to start us off.
Yeah, thank you, Manager Dahl, Madam Mayor and Council. So again, me and our city forester, Bennett Myron, will kind of tag team this presentation. I'll start it off and wrap it up, but Forester Myron will kind of go over the bulk of the changes here tonight. So again, this is for zoning text amendments to Chapter 936, Tree Preservation Ordinance, 918, Fencing and Screening, and 902, Rules and Regulations. 902 is actually pretty much just our definition code of the zoning code, so it just includes all our definitions in there, which we'll touch on here in a second too. So if the council remembers, we recently came forward with kind of a comprehensive zoning text amendments to Chapter 936 TPO. There's a couple other sections, but the bulk of the changes were in that Chapter 936, which I'll refer to as the TPO. That was in October of 2022. Since then, pretty much the start of the year, we rolled out the zoning text amendments and started the tree removal permit process. Since then, to this date, we've had 23 tree removal permits that have been approved and one that has been denied. And Forester Myron has been doing, pretty much all that work with the tree removal permits, and it's been going pretty well so far. But since the changes went into effect and since the process of the tree removal permits have started, we found some additional updates that would help us enforce the TPO as intended and to regulate the tree preservation ordinance as intended. So with that, I'll pass it to Bennett, or Forester Myron, to go over the proposed changes here.
Good evening.
Good evening.
We're sharing a microphone tonight. Like Nick said, most of what we're going to talk about is just points of clarification. There was a few things that we missed when we were putting this together last summer and last fall. So let's go over that. Clarification for heritage trees. The definitions in the ordinance currently don't specify, a heritage tree isn't defined in the ordinance currently as being healthy, which isn't a big deal in its own right, but it causes some other issues when you're dealing with removal permits and how to calculate replacements with the development. Because certain heritage trees or certain trees of 25 or 30-inch diameter or larger could be misinterpreted as being heritage, even if they were hazardous or dead or so on and so forth. And the update the need for a tree removal permit, so that's to include any tree now which is 6 inches or greater. That's an important change because currently it reads that the tree removal permit process only applies to significant or heritage trees. So it leaves out trees that are hazardous, diseased, dying, and those are trees that while we're not going to, most likely, we're not going to collect a fee on those types of removals. Those are trees that we really want to be aware of. So our concern is that diseased trees especially are going to be removed without us knowing about it. We want to track the movement of pests and pathogens through the city. The past tree removal section was new in October, and I think that was a great addition, but currently the way it reads, it only comes into effect if a tree removal permit is being applied for in the present. And what that means is if a property was clear cut, once the developer comes in for a building permit, they're not applying for a tree removal permit, and therefore the past tree removal clause wouldn't come into play, which would be unfortunate.
Quick question for you, Bennett.
Yeah.
On that. If every tree that was removed was less than 6 inches,
Yep.
they clear cut, but everything's less than 6 inches, would that trigger a tree preservation plan, or would we require anything there? How would
Yeah.
that work?
Good question. So unfortunately, just by nature of the way the tree removal permit is structured, it likely would not, just because they wouldn't have needed a permit, and therefore those removals wouldn't be on record.
And then, so if we start tracking at 6 inches, right, if that's the first hurdle,
Yeah.
the difference then between 6 inches, refresh my memory on a significant, what's the size of a significant tree?
So a significant tree, the definition is different depending on the species. And in the ordinance, we split that up. We have fast or rapid growth species and standard growth species. So a significant tree would be, for a rapid growth species, would be 12 inches or greater. For a standard growth species, it would be 6 inches or greater. But in terms of tree removal permits, we kind of want to eliminate any confusion about species ID. We don't want people cutting down a 8-inch oak tree thinking that it was a silver maple or something like that.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
You bet. So this piece here is, I think, the only brand new piece of information that we're adding to the ordinance. So currently we talk a lot about a tree's critical root zone, which is, you might remember, that's a 1.5 foot of protection radius for every inch of diameter at breast height. That really affects the health of the tree and not much else. A structural root zone certainly does also affect the health of the tree, but when we get that close to the base of the trunk, you can see that red triangle at the bottom of the diagram. We are now going to be more concerned about total tree failure. This could be, basically, when you get within that radius, it's very likely that the whole tree is going to fail and cause potentially significant damage. So we're adding that definition so that we can deal with those types of trees in a different way when it comes to development. So if a tree protection can't be implemented beyond the structural root zone, then the tree cannot be preserved no matter what type of protection standards the developer might come up with, just because we can't risk that. It's too hazardous. We don't want some big tree falling on a new house or a construction crew or anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. Councilmember Iverson has a question for you.
Sure.
Bennett.
So as I look at that, Bennett, so it really is more inclusive of what the tree canopy is and what the size of the canopy, and protecting that zone around what the scale of the canopy is and around to that. So we've actually enlarged that significantly, right?
No, the size of the critical root zone, that formula hasn't changed, and we don't intend to change it. It is 1.5 feet per inch of diameter, and that's 1.5 feet radius. So in this example, a 20-inch tree would have a 30-foot critical root zone that needs to be protected during construction or redevelopment.
So have I in the past seen the bright orange fences around more the structural root zone?
It varies. So in general, the structural root zone, it's a big, the critical root zone is a big area, and oftentimes it's not realistic to protect the entire critical root zone, but you kind of have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. These things are very species dependent, really dependent on the types of soil that are around the tree. And kind of across the board, you can alter or compact up to 25% of that critical root zone without having any real risk of impacting the health of the tree.
Okay, so if they are placing heavy equipment close to the tree or leaning stuff against the tree, will that alleviate that by moving the zone out larger?
Well, that's the purpose of the critical root zone, of identifying that, and the goal is to have that tree protection up at the edge of that critical root zone.
Okay, I'm stating to the audience what I'm assuming, what I see is obvious, but I want to make sure that I'm seeing a significant change from some of the practices that I've seen in the past. So I'm grateful for that. I think this will help because I do worry about some of the trees where I've seen the zone quite a bit closer and the health of that tree, 5, 6, 7 years down the road. So thank you for doing that. I just wanted to clarify again for the audience listening that we're going to see that zone expand. So I appreciate that.
I think previously it was always discussed that it would be what is it called? The drip
line.
Drip line.
Yeah.
Yeah, that we were always going to go to the drip line, protect from there, but this is more encompassing.
Well, it depends. The drip line is often referenced because it's visible, and you don't have to do any math to find it. The problem is there are certain species where it becomes problematic. These white pines out the window have a much bigger root zone than their canopy suggests. Also, you'll see columnar species that look like telephone poles. Their root zone is much bigger than that would suggest. So this formula is typically a better reflection of what's actually going on underground versus using the drip line.
This is why we have an arborist. Thank you.
You bet. A few other changes here. We'd like to remove the minimums for tree and plant sizes in terms of landscape replacement plans. Few reasons for this. I think the main reason for me is smaller plants generally have less transplant shock. They usually lead to a healthier, longer-lived plant, whether that's a tree or a shrub or anything else, really. The other reason is I don't think we should discourage people from using smaller plants, because if they're required to meet a certain replacement figure according to inches, all that means is they're going to be planting more trees because they're using a smaller format. So a couple of the main reasons. Add language to prohibit or restrict plantings based on the MDA's list, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. Currently, there is some discussion of specific species in our ordinance. That is problematic, whether you are encouraging species or restricting them, because these things change every year. Our tree population changes. We want to encourage certain species based on our inventory or based on, emerald ash borer shows up. We need to rethink the use of green ash trees, things like that. we'd like to cite an outside source from a reputable agency like the MDA, who is constantly reassessing those lists and coming up with good best practices. So yeah, kind of the same logic for this next point, which is remove the list of suitable trees. And yeah, I think that's about it.
I assume local nurseries also follow the Department of Agriculture's recommendations?
They do.
Is that a fair statement, or am I completely off base?
No, they do. You're not going to find any invasive species at a nursery. People should be mindful, though, that there are restricted species at nurseries. And usually a restricted species will have a species-specific tag on it. And usually it'll specify that, this tree should only be planted in a maintained area that does not have any natural areas or perennial landscape beds within a quarter mile sometimes. And that's because they seed so prolifically and they're generally not native.
Gotcha.
So.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet.
Yeah, so, and then I'll just add for this slide here, before we move on to the wrap up, the main thing with chapter 918, a lot of these changes are just to make it conform and make it similar to chapter 936, the TPO. We didn't necessarily look at fencing and screening when we looked at kind of the overall TPO updates. So this is more or less to keep it in line with chapter 936. And then chapter 902, we added this in here too because right now all the definitions for the tree-related items are under chapter 936, but where all the other zoning definitions are in chapter 902. So we wanted to make it a little less confusing for folks if they look to 902 for the definitions of this part of the zoning code, that it would be pretty much in the correct section as well. So that's kind of the reason for adding chapter 902 in there too and updating that. So again, to wrap it up here, so at the Planning Commission meeting, there was a good discussion there. Really, the Planning Commission noted that the proposed amendments are reasonable. The overall goal is to protect, preserve, and enhance the natural environment of the community, which they felt that the proposed amendments did. And then again, based on kind of the experience of staff and the tree removal permit, this will help us improve enforcement of the TPO as intended, kind of through that last go around that we did. At that meeting, they did discuss some general feedback, so far of how that process has been going as well. So we touched on that a little bit. So for the council, some of the questions to consider: the text amendments fit with the 2040 comp plan? Do the proposed changes conform to the present and future land uses of the area? And do the proposed changes help protect, preserve, and enhance the natural environment of the community? And then as a note, we haven't had any real formal public comments on these changes here tonight.
Okay.
With that, I'll pass it back to Madam Mayor and Council for any questions you might have.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick. Questions of the or of staff? No? Yes. Go ahead, Kathy.
So just a discussion. So I had talked to Jeff in regards to perhaps coming back and looking at putting a definition of clear cutting into this tree preservation plan. And that discussion got started because of a phone call that I got regarding a property, and I won't say the property. And it just led to the discussion between Jeff and I, well, what does clear cutting mean? So I went and did a little bit of research because I think that was part of the discussion we had as council too. Well, what does that mean? So a couple of things that I found is 100% clear cutting of the trees from a property. That typically you see more in a forestry type of an application where they are cutting the trees down for lumber or other uses, and then the forestry has replanting. In some of the other city ordinances that I found, it was a clear cutting of a percentage, perhaps 80% or 90% of the trees from a property. I thought perhaps that would be a better point of starting discussions amongst council about putting some definition of clear cutting in, because I think it will continue to come up, as I unfortunately saw in a particular property. And I just think that it's one of those things that we keep talking about a little bit tonight, kind of gets kicked down the road. But perhaps an easy addendum to the tree preservation plan is to put something as simple as an 80% or a 90% removal of trees from a property, regardless of the size of the tree. Bennett, do you have any comments on
Yeah.
that? What have you seen?
Yeah, it's a really tough question, really hard to define, and I know people try to do it in lots of different ways. The problem with putting a percentage on it, I think, is twofold in our situation. One, 80% of the tree canopy looks very different depending on where you are in Wayzata. That could be a lot of trees, or it could be a small lot that only has 2 trees, and that can lead to other problems. The other thing is, if we were to enforce something like that, we would probably struggle because an applicant would have to prove that they are not clear cutting, in which case they would need to provide a tree inventory of the entire property, which could be burdensome. But we'll continue to look into it, absolutely.
Have you seen any better definitions of what clear cutting, how it could be defined? Or I struggled too,
Yeah.
honestly, to find something I thought made complete sense other than these ones that had percentages.
Sure. Yeah. There are certain municipalities that have an inch limit, which, when you think about it, with the variety of properties that we have in Wayzata, it kind of has the same limitations as the percentage-based definition does. I think 100% removal could certainly qualify, and if we could include that just to have it, I don't know what we would gain from it, but we could certainly continue to explore our options there.
So I need some clarification. So we don't currently have clear-cutting language, but we have an example of someone recently who has clear-cut a lot or just removed a lot of trees. And what are we trying to achieve? Because before we go down that road, we just had a workshop about zoning and zoning amendments, and we have a list and it laid out
Big list.
for $196,000 over 4 years. So we're going to have to add that to the list and prioritize. I mean, if it's something that's already covered with our ordinance in terms of what this property owner did, then we need to, because this is a situation I'm not familiar with at all, so I can't really speak to it, but it seems like we have talked about it before, but that's not what we're considering tonight. So is that something similar to Councilmember Plekish, strategic plan? Let's talk about this some more. and
Similar.
prioritize?
Yes, Jeff just thought that this was a good opportunity to bring this point of discussion up again. It's not going to affect the resolution that's in front of us tonight, so I'm
Right.
happy to table it to another time for further discussion on it.
So can we talk a little bit about what happened with that property, just so, because I mean, literally, I know nothing of what you guys are talking about, so what happened?
I'll give some background without saying address or anything.
Yeah, I don't need an address.
Okay, so I got multiple phone calls about trees being completely removed from a property. So I drove out and took a look at it, had made some phone calls, and Jeff made some phone calls, and then I later found out the correct information about what was going on, which I was able to pass on to the people that had reached out to me. And I think the purpose behind having something is to deter people from doing that and asking for forgiveness later.
Sure.
Because it does happen, and we live in an affluent community where sometimes those penalties are not enough to keep that behavior from stopping. Even if it is in our ordinance, and if we have language, it still might not stop it. But I think as a community, if we don't want that to happen, we should make a stand. Say, we're not okay with clear-cutting properties in Wayzata.
So can we talk about, we got calls, we got additional information, what happened?
Madam Mayor, as far as I know, it's my understanding that it's a big lot, a visible lot, took down a lot of trees. I don't know that they took down every tree. They did, talking with Mr. Meyer, and they did they go through the right process. So they have a plan in place to replace all of them and transport actually big trees. So my understanding is that they're abiding by our new code, which is, comparably pretty strict. I don't know how many trees they've
Close
left.
to 500 inches, and so the fear from community is that we won't ever see those replacements in our lifetime. And so how does that happen when such a significant amount of trees are removed?
Okay, so.
Regardless, because of,
Yeah.
they have the ability to replant, but it will be generations before it's seen.
But then, I think we need to, I think we need to table this for certainly a much more in-depth conversation. I have mixed emotion about it. Yeah, we certainly don't want our trees to be cut down, healthy trees. We went through an extensive process for a tree preservation ordinance. We've put significant fees into it and are charging people significant fees. We hired we have an arborist. We have done so much to try and protect our trees. What I'm hearing is, I want to make sure we don't get to the point of no tree ever gets cut down, because that's not realistic. And I feel like we're constantly looking to get stricter and more stringent, and eventually the people don't have the proper use of their own property.
No, and I realize, that is completely unrealistic to put any of those burdens on a property owner, to say that you can't do this, you can't do that. But I think what I was hearing from the community is, why such a large volume? That's the issue that I think as a council, maybe we can come back and talk about. What is considered reasonable? And that's a hard definition to answer. I don't know that. And if I'm, the only one that has any concern about trying to push this a little bit farther, I'm happy to walk away from it. I'm happy to put my hands up and say I did the best that I could, if no one else shares that at the table with me tonight. But we don't have we looked at our data for our tree canopy and what's left. And I'm trying to help reduce the percentage of tree loss every year that's happening. That's all. And I don't know the magic answer to that either. There's probably people out there that have tackled this before us. And how do we look at that is all I'm asking. And is it important to the city of Wayzata to do that?
Well, I think it is important. However, I'm also happy to hear that people were following the process that we laid out, that we agreed here as a council was important. And if we decided that that was important, that's what they followed. I don't know that I want one person's, if they're replanting, they're replanting. And that's what we dictated. We can certainly keep looking at it, but this has been 6 years in the making, at least.
No.
And, other thoughts from the council? It's an important topic, but I don't want to spend tens of thousands of dollars for one person who ultimately followed the rules.
I'm happy to let it go. If I'm the only one, in my year and a half left, I'm happy to not bring the subject back up, but.
Madam Mayor, could I add one thing?
Certainly.
Thank you. Part of this has to do with the tree protection standards that we were talking about earlier. I am very careful to look at proposed preservation efforts and how much of that road zone is actually being protected. And if it's not sufficient, I would rather them remove it preemptively, because I know what's going to happen in a few years. And if we were to just let it slide and let them make the claim that this is a preservation, then we lose the tree a few years later and there's no replacement. If it's removed now, knowing that it won't survive, we can talk about replacement now on the front end and actually make a difference in that sense.
Yeah, I know that we have no better advocate for the proper implementation of the ordinance for the long-term benefit of the community when you're working with folks, and I really appreciate that. And the more stringent standards for the protection. So in that situation where you would recommend tree removal, are you then also requiring replanting?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Great, thank you.
Madam Mayor, our plan all along is to come back after this first year is over with and kind of give an update, talk about how much money we spend from an administration perspective, and offer some other suggestions too. So we can add that to our list to ensure we bring that up in terms of what staff recommends on if we do anything at all with clear cutting.
How does that sound? Perfect. Yeah, I like that. Is the council good with that? Sure. Yeah. Thoughts?
I just thought I'd weigh in. I think clear cutting is a legitimate thing to talk about, and then, as I recall, I actually think I brought it up like 6 years ago myself and cited a situation when I was living in Chicago where the old Mr. T bought a place in Lake Forest, and very affluent community, and he actually did clear cut everything. And so I was very, very aware of that. It may be a problematic thing to define, I grant that, and it's probably not something we would do tonight or talk about, but I think it's a legitimate thing to think about down the road and put language in to prevent something like that from happening. I think that's a legitimate point, just not tonight maybe.
Yeah, and we certainly can, and it has occurred. I mean, whatever the definition is of clear cutting. But I also, if our current ordinance addresses, the crux of it,
Well, I
just
do
wanna
think
make
that our
sure.
ordinance now is more than adequate.
Yeah.
And, 6 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever it was, we really didn't have much of anything. We sort of punted on all of it, and then we had nothing. Now we have something, and that something is a far better thing than we had before. So I think we've done a good job.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's circle back to that then with the update. Okay. Any other questions? I have one person here in the audience who would like to talk about fees in the preservation ordinance. Mr. Michael Travanti, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes, it's Michael Travanti. I live at 16218 Holdridge Road in Wayzata. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak here. We are currently planning some remodeling, and we are running into the tree ordinance right now. We have two heritage trees that are very proximate to our existing home. And as part of the remodeling, even replacing the existing structure, we don't feel that we would be able to preserve both of them, and likely not either of them. And we are, we've been working with Bennett and the city manager to try and navigate this process. And we've really arrived at a situation where, one of the trees has fees and future liabilities of in excess of $10,000 of replacement or just the fee value of the tree in order to allow us to move forward. And I am asking the city council for some direction in how I might be able to navigate, coming up with a reduced or eliminating the fee schedule, and really to provide the comment that I believe this is restrictive in situations where a resident is looking to do remodeling and what I would consider a modest expansion of the footprint of our home.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mr. Travanti. I appreciate you coming forward before the council with your concerns. Not knowing the nature of your project, I don't know that it would be appropriate for the council to weigh in on the specifics of the project. But further to that, the fees are part of our ordinance, and so we're not, I don't know that we'd be able to really have a discussion or weigh in because it's not on the agenda for the public to be able to come and listen on this subject. So what would the process be? I'm looking to city manager and city attorney. Is that a variance request based on an application that comes before us? We've never experienced something, a request such as this.
Right, yeah, good questions. I think because it's in the zoning code, there's a variance process. We don't typically have these types of variance requests, but that is something that the resident could move forward with. Certainly that takes some time and there's some risk involved and costs, but that's one way. The other way probably is to, if the council wanted us to explore looking at the fee schedule, just to, determine now that the code has been up and running for a half a year or so, would we suggest any changes? That could be higher, that could be lower, could have an impact on what we've been, responding with the applicant. Other than that, I don't really have a good solution, aside from it's the code and, we have to follow it. We don't have the authority to make exceptions under the way it's written right now.
Right, and
Despite, a good case for it.
absolutely. City Attorney, any additional thoughts on the issue?
Madam Mayor, I guess I'd just add to what City Manager Dahl said that, this is part of the zoning code, so a landowner has the option of seeking a variance. I think that would be challenging because they'd have to show practical difficulties that the problem is related to the land. There's also an appeal process in the zoning ordinance for administrative decisions, but that's only if, the city manager or the city forester was applying the ordinance in an incorrect way. I don't think that's the case here. I agree with City Manager Dahl that the most efficient and probably targeted option would be to look at the city's fee ordinance. That would not require a planning commission review or a public hearing. It would be a council decision. You adopt that fee schedule at the beginning of every year, and maybe look at categories of fees and making distinctions between a private developer and a resident property owner. I think that's probably the most practical way you could look at relief. Of course, we couldn't do that tonight. We couldn't do it for a single landowner. It would be a citywide decision you would make as a matter of policy. You want to relook at the fees for a certain category of property owners in the city.
Very good. And when we typically do that at the beginning of the year, in January?
End of the year.
End of the year. Mr. Travanti, based on that, what are your thoughts? I mean, our hands are a little bit tied. We can't do anything this evening to assist you. Are you able to work with us on a timing perspective for that time frame, or are you looking to break ground next week, at which we won't be able to help you then either?
We were looking to break ground in the middle of June, so waiting till next year is it would obviously be putting the project off for a year.
Sure. So with that, staff, obviously we understand timing for construction projects, and that's critical. Is there something that we can do to kind of hold off on collecting and maybe put money in escrow until we make a decision? It may not change at all, fair warning. But if it does, then I don't know what the process would be. I don't want to delay things, but I don't want to ask for money in advance that we may not ultimately require him to pay if we change our fee structure.
It's a good point, Madam Mayor. There is an option where they do give us an escrow in order to, if they're doing their own plantings and saving the tree, if they're able to. I don't know if we can go, it'd be a good question for the city attorney, if we do ultimately decide to reduce the fee down the road some point, could we, even though the project was approved, now before the fee was reduced, could we reduce the amount of escrow? We might be able to, but that's getting into the details. I don't want to speculate right now.
Well, maybe, so we're putting, obviously, staff, city attorney in a difficult position. May I ask that you give them some time to kind of come up with maybe some options and work with you through that process, and then we will consider the fee schedule at the appropriate time, and in between that they can maybe solution with you.
Certainly, I appreciate any considerations.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Sound good?
Yeah, just to be clear though, we wouldn't be planning on bringing the fee schedule back up until the normal time. However, in the meantime, we're looking at to see like if there's escrow, we can work around that and potentially reduce it if we're able to do that, if the fees get reduced.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Figure,
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I think we'll
Possible
have to look at that. Yeah, we'll look at that.
put some creative.
City attorney is known for being very creative, but we can't guarantee anything, but
No,
we'll
of
try.
course,
Yeah.
of course.
Madam Mayor, do you mind if I ask a question or
Not
two?
at all, please.
It was a question I was going to ask anyway before this even came to council, but right now, if there is a development project that impinges on a heritage tree, and it's deemed that the heritage tree needs to be removed, and we approve that for whatever reason, and that developer cannot replace those inches on the property for whatever reason, and they pay us a fee in lieu of for that heritage tree. Can you tell me what that fee would be?
So the fee is based on the inches, the same way that the replacement escrow would be. It's a slightly different formula.
So let me just throw in a hypothetical.
Yeah.
That hypothetical tree is the same size as the tree that this gentleman is talking about. And I don't know what size that is, but if you do, let's take that number.
Yeah. I believe it is about $10,000. I think I gave.
That's the dollar number, but what is the size of the tree itself?
Oh, it is 36 inches? 33.
Okay, so we had a developer that had a 33-inch heritage tree on his property. Now, we're hypothetical again, and that developer was granted the variance to remove the tree, could not replace those inches because of whatever, and had to pay us a fee in lieu of for that tree. How much would that be?
It would be around $10,000.
Same number?
Same number.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We don't distinguish between,
Just wanted to be sure.
yeah,
All right.
correct.
Yes, Madam Mayor, we don't draw a distinction currently in the ordinance or fee schedule between a developer and a private landowner.
Okay.
Yes, Molly?
Just a clarifying question. So in this hypothetical so are you charged the fee for taking the heritage tree down, or are you charged the fee for not replacing the tree?
Well, ideally, the tree would be replaced, assuming there is room to do so on the property. If there isn't, which that happens, then we want to collect that same amount of money, or inch-wise, and replace them elsewhere.
So I hope this is okay, and I'm using you as our example right now. So this resident right here is being charged $10,000 for taking down or might be, if it comes down, whatever. Does that mean that they're not replacing the tree?
So it could be, it can be some combination of fee in lieu of planting and replacement, which is backed by an escrow. It can get complicated, but that happens where, so if the tree is 33 inches, it's heritage, so that translates to 66 inches of replacement, which is a lot of trees. Most, like a potted tree you'd see in a nursery is about 1.5 inches. So that's a lot of trees to plant. So it happens quite often, actually, where a heritage tree is removed and a part of that 66 inches is planted on the property. Those trees are backed by an escrow, which is released based on the health of those replacement trees. And the other inches that couldn't fit on the property are mitigated in the form of a fee in lieu of planting, which is then used for public trees.
So in this situation, assuming there's not room to plant 66 new trees on this property, which is why they're looking at a fee? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, again, bear with me. I know we just did this tree preservation ordinance, and perhaps we're missing an unintended consequence. or a burden on the resident, but if the lot already has so many trees on it that they can't plant anymore, isn't the point of the tree preservation ordinance to preserve the trees? So it feels like this cycle, which I think is why we have such a difficult time with this ordinance, but I just thought I would make that a little bit more clear, or just kind of see why this can spiral and be so difficult on a resident as opposed to, say, a developer.
Sure. Yeah, it's a tricky situation, and I must say it's the first time that I've dealt with a property where the issue is that it's a big property that is already so wooded. Typically, it's a small lot that had 3 heritage trees on it, and you just can't feasibly fit them on that lot, even though it was clear cut. So 2 very different situations, but they're handled the same way in the eyes of the ordinance.
Right, thank you. All right. It's about as clear as mud. All right, we have if there's no other discussion, we have a proposed motion to approve the first reading of Ordinance 825, approving zoning text amendments to Chapter 936, Tree Preservation Ordinance, Chapter 918, Fencing Screening, and Chapter 902, Rules and Regulations, pardon me. Anyone care to make that motion?
Madam Mayor, I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Jeff. And is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That motion passes. Bennett, thank you very much. Appreciate all your work on this. All right, let's see. Next, we have I think I have the wrong page. One moment, please. Yeah, I do have the wrong page here. Consider adoption of Resolution 33-2023 and 34-2023, approving a conditional use permit for municipal solar at 600 Roy Street East and 747 Mill Street East. Jeff?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We don't get to see Nick as much, Assistant Parks Planner Keyser as much, because he's working on all things parks. We don't see him for planning applications, but we are blessed tonight to have him walk through another application here. So, Nick, this is nostalgic for us. We're all emotional. We're happy you're here, and please walk us through this item.
Yes, blessings and good tidings to you.
Wow, that is the best intro I've had so far.
He's the best.
Yeah, like you were noted, I'm back here to talk about solar once again here. So, pretty much.
We should throw some chickens in there too. I'm just saying.
Yeah. So like it was noted, this is for 2 conditional use permits. It's essentially 1 conditional use permit per property that we're looking at here tonight. So the first one is for 600 Rice Street East. It's for the solar project to put solar on City Hall right here, the library, and the fire station. So that's the 600 Rice Street block. And then down at the Muni and Liquor Store, that would be the other property for the conditional use permit at 747 Mill Street East. So just for a little bit of context, I'll zoom in a little bit later too on these, but just a little context of where these properties are in relation to the other properties. So this is just an aerial view of the 2 properties. We can come back to that if we need to. The zoning and land use, so first starting with 600 Rice Street East, that block, it is zoned institutional. It's got a mix of uses around it, institutional, PUD, and just general residential properties. The guidance for that in the comp plan, it is guided as institutional or public, kind of the same thing. It's surrounded by medium density residential, institutional, mixed use, and as you get more to the south there, central business district. Then we move down to the Muni and Liquor Store property. This property is zoned C4B, Central Business District. It's a parking ramp right next to it. To the west, to the north is the Winston Townhomes, the east, the Promenade, and then there's essentially a parking lot to the south, but those are in commercial properties, which are C4B, Central Business District as well. For future land use, it is guided CBD, same with the properties to the south. Again, the parking lot there to the west, and then medium density residential as you get up to the Winston Townhomes. So for a little bit more context here, and I'll zoom in on the next slide here. It'll go. So this is the design districts that we currently have in our design standards. So when we back up a little bit, when we approved the solar ordinance a few months ago, this is the kind of the standard that we put the solar ordinance around. So based on the design district, it has different rules and regulations in the solar ordinance. So it's kind of important here. As you can see, the City Hall complex, 600 block, and then the Muni Liquor Store are both within the Bluff District. So since they are both in the Bluff District, any commercial building that is looking to put municipal solar on their rooftop is required to get a conditional use permit. So that is why we are essentially kind of coming back again. I know we approved the agreement with Blue Horizon earlier, and then since then the solar ordinance was approved, which required us to come back to get for this CUP request. So these are the close-ups of the aerials. So just as a little bit of a note, for the Muni Liquor Store property, mainly I wanted to, you can't necessarily see it from the aerial, but from topography point of view, the topography does go up as you get towards the Winston Townhomes there to the north. And then again, there's the parking lot to the south. Then for the 600 Rice Street property, again, topography, the buildings themselves are mainly on the same elevation, the same line, but as you get more south along that property and down to the lower parking lot, the topography goes down pretty significantly for those blocks. And there'd be some images that might show that a little bit better later on here. And I'll essentially kind of breeze through this, as the council knows this more or less, but this municipal solar project came out of the energy environment work through the Energy Action Plan and really the strategy for supporting renewable energy in municipal buildings. So ultimately, they recommended the Blue Horizon Energy proposal, which was approved by council. Now we're coming back. It's essentially the same project, just with these CUP requests here. Again, just the general reasons for the E&E to pursue this project are listed here. I won't go through them there, but. So for the project overall, just a general run through of it, it's to install rooftop solar on City Hall, the library, fire station, Muni Liquor Store, and the Public Works Building. You can note that the Public Works Building doesn't need a CUP request because it's outside the Bluff Design District and any design district, essentially. The total cost of all the installations is the same at $650,000, just over that. Net savings of just over $850,000 too, which comes from a few different savings aspects. Approximately a third of our total energy usage would be offset by the solar production, so the energy usage of the buildings that the solar would be on. And then the proposed installation, if the CUPs are approved, would be summer or fall of 2023. These images are just a general context of where the solar panels would be located on each of the buildings. So to start here with City Hall, you can see that the panels aren't going to be where we are currently in the community room, just based on the shading of some of the trees and the pitch of this roof, but it's going to be on essentially the main office buildings of the City Hall instead of flat roof, and make those panels the most efficient. Fire building, you can see the locations there. I think on the Muni Liquor Store one, you can see the kind of the setbacks, but generally you can see the setbacks of all these panels are going to be 3 to 4 feet from the roof edge as well. I wanted to note that. The library system is going to be on that pitched roof there a little bit and on the western side On the eastern side, there's some more shading there too, so we wanted to not put panels in that location. And then lastly, the Muni liquor store solar system. So that'll be proposed to be on all the pitched roofs and on the flat roofs, which are which are in the rear of that building there. And you can note the 4-foot setbacks. That's the image that has those listed there. Mainly the solar systems are going to be a ballasted system for the flat roofs. They're going to be essentially just placed on the roof itself and weighted down at max height of 14 feet. And then the panels that are on the pitched roofs are going to follow the pitch of the roof mainly just for the Muni liquor store proposal that are not on the flat roof sections. I added this in here. You saw the images a little bit earlier on too, but the City of Morris did a very similar project a few years ago now. The one on the right is actually their liquor store, municipal liquor store. So you can kind of get more or less a real world context of what that would look like for the pitched roofs and then the flat roof there of that kind of system. These are just some images from various areas of right-of-way around those buildings. You can see for the ones at the 600 block, you can't necessarily see the roof too much. The one that would be the most notable would be the Muni liquor store. So this is, again, just for a little bit more context. And if we get to the next slide here, yeah. So one of from the Planning Commission discussion, the Muni liquor store was the property, probably the most discussion just because of the actual visual impact and noticeability of these solar panels for that building. They also discussed, where the outside electrical work would be located and what that would more or less look like. But ultimately, they recommended approval unanimously, really stating the environmental sustainability guiding principle in the 2040 comp plan, essentially saying Wayzata should take a lead on sustainability goals and objectives. So again, some of the similar questions here. Do the conditional use permits fit with the 2040 comp plan? The proposed changes conform to present and future land uses of the area. Does the project create any adverse effects on the area? And we have not received any public comments to date. So with that, I'll pass back to Madam Mayor and Council for any questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick. Questions of staff? No? Quick question. Muni liquor store, C4B, it's zoned, yet the Mill Street ramp, City Hall, everything else is institutional. Why the difference?
I might be speculating a little bit here, but I would say that's more of a commercial use compared to like a service like City Hall, fire station, library, being a restaurant and a liquor store.
Okay, even though it's owned by the city. Okay, very good. Second question, did we send out any kind of notices to the people up at Witston?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, good question. So we followed all the same regulations as all of our development applications. So we sent out public notices to everyone within 500 feet for both the properties, and it was in the weekly, online, all those avenues, yeah.
And we haven't heard back from anyone?
Correct.
All right, very good. Thank you. Yes, go ahead, Jeff.
Is there a way do we have to approve both of them, or both the firehouse and the village hall and the Muni? Can you pull the Muni off? And what percentage of the savings is the Muni? And have we already gotten a contract where we've signed a contract for all of these?
Yeah, council members, so a few questions there. So the agreement itself was approved and signed by both parties. They are obviously aware we're going through the CUP process, so we obviously have to get that approved before we can keep moving forward, essentially keep moving forward with the building permit process. So we're kind of at that stage now. And I would say the total savings of the Muni is a little bit, I don't have the exact number of exactly how much savings that's going to give us in terms of net savings. But I would say that is our second biggest solar system that would get, producer of energy behind the Public Works building. The ones in the 600 block are much smaller systems. There's much more area down at the Muni liquor store that we can utilize. But again, it's kind of, I would say it's up to the council, and it did come up with the planning commission as well as to, can we pull one of the conditional use permits off? We did separate them out, so they're separate conditional use permits, separate resolutions, depending on that conversation.
Thoughts? I mean,
Yeah, I don't like it on the Muni. I think it's, the aesthetic trade-off is too big for the savings.
so what is, we don't have the dollar amount for the Muni?
We didn't necessarily break it out by system for the net savings. We certainly can do that. The one note I would say, and that I brought up at the planning commission as well, the E&E committee really pushed the Muni liquor store just for that educational component and visibility component of that. But again, we can certainly parse it out more or less or change the agreement.
So the example of the city of Morris, I think, is probably the concerning piece here. Because when we saw the pictures, right, the sketches, you've got a black square instead of jagged panels. Is there a way to have filler pieces or something so it's more uniform looking and not zigzaggy, different colored? I don't want to speak for anybody here, but that was a little bit of a shock to me as well.
Yeah.
Because that's not, I don't remember if we saw this image originally. But compared to the sketches, this is a different look and feel.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I mean, we can certainly look into seeing if there's way to unify it maybe in a better way, make it more aesthetically pleasing. And I assume it's kind of the pitched roof area, the one kind of the south side is the most concerned. So I can certainly ask our...
Well, on the north side as well, because we have, it looked like if we go to the renderings that were provided, they're going to put some arrays on the back. Well, it doesn't look like it's going to be staggered here. We have enough, and it doesn't look jagged.
Yeah, that's a good point. Mainly, we have pretty much straight roof edges on this compared to Morris, which has more of an angled on the sides, but yeah.
Right. Okay.
Can you go to, sorry, Molly, can you go to the image that shows how they're angled? Is that one of your concerns too? Are they angled or do they lay flat? Not this one, keep going back. This.
So this is a picture of what would be on the flat roof, essentially. The panels will be the same for the pitched roof. They'll just be the same pitch, flush on the roof, on the pitched areas.
They're not raised.
Right, correct.
Okay, good. Because all the ones that I've been seeing, they're not raised at all. They're all flush, and it gives a very different look.
So that's, but you need to have some kind of angle to be able to maximize the capture of the solar
Correct.
energy.
Right.
Yeah, okay, on a flat roof.
The Muni liquor store in the city of Morris, that picture looks like it's taken from up in the air, not from the street level. Can you don't you think?
That is a good question. I believe both of them are essentially drone shots.
Drones. Yeah, so it looks a little bit more intense, I would say.
Right.
Maybe.
Well, and that's my concern on the, definitely on the north side and the flat roof for the Muni operations, because Witston is on that side, the residences. So I do think we need to be prepared that if we put those up and, it's not as intended, that we have a plan B prepared. Keep it, remove it on the north side, put up some kind of visual block. We may get those.
Yeah.
But I don't know, Jeff. this rendering versus the other, still same concern?
I just think we've spent hours talking about rooftop equipment and we're just adding to it. Why would we do that? When we have other places where we can put where it's flat and not really see it. I mean, you couldn't see the stuff on top of the Methuen building, but we sat here and talked about it for 40 minutes. And now we're wanting to prove something that's really obvious, just for a lesson to teach people that we're progressive. I think it's a trade-off and I'm happy with it. On the other buildings, I think it's fine and let's do it. But this is, maybe we walk before we run. Maybe we see what it looks like. Maybe we mock it up more. Maybe that's just my concern. And I'm only one vote, but I would vote against the Muni, but I would vote for Rice Street.
Okay. Other thoughts from the council?
Couple. We approved the contract for this before this came through, and the contract was for all of this. Is that correct?
Correct.
Since that contract has already been approved, what effect would it have if we disapproved the plan for the Muni?
So we would have to, I would assume we would work with the installer and that company to amend that contract in a way.
So they're aware that this might happen tonight?
They're very aware that we're going through this conditional use permit process and that it's not approved yet. That's why we kind of stalled the building permit process of that. So they know they need to get this approval before we can move forward. So they understand the risk, essentially.
Okay. The other comment I would make is not related to that, which is we're in a bit of a conundrum here. We're actually in a conflict of interest situation. We're asking ourselves to approve ourselves for something that we already signed a contract for. We're going to have to do it. I don't know any way to avoid it, but it is a little bit interesting.
I'll just clarify, Councilmember Plekish, Madam Mayor, we don't have to approve it tonight. We do have to make some kind of action, but you don't have to approve the CUP for the Muni.
But we're asking ourselves to approve something for ourselves.
Yeah.
Like we do for a number of things. I mean, this isn't
Well, just
rare.
pointing out that it's a
Yes,
little bit interesting.
City Attorney.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I guess I take Councilmember Plekish's point on one level, but I mean, we also want to follow the law. You know, the city is not exempt from following its own zoning ordinance, so we're going through that process. The second thing I'd say is that tonight, the only thing before you is whether the property would be entitled with the conditional use permit for solar. So city still controls what goes on its own buildings. It can revisit that contract. One of the conditions of this CUP is that the applicant, meaning the city, must build and complete it in conformance with the plans and work with planning staff on the final details of the installations. So you are giving planning staff, city staff, some discretion to tweak, I would say probably minor things. But you do have the prerogative to conditional CUP, as you always do, or as the city manager said, table that action till you see more renderings. And even if you did approve the CUP, you could still work with your contractor installing it on the roof of the Muni if there are design or aesthetic concerns. I think if council doesn't want it to go there, then you wouldn't want to approve the CUP and you'd want to revisit the contract.
So wasn't there a critical timing issue on the contract, as I recall? We had to approve it by a certain point to reap the benefits we were expecting?
Yeah, Madam Mayor and Council, so we did essentially extend some of the incentives that we would be getting for the solar systems. And I can't remember the exact date that we extended it to. We essentially worked with Excel to extend those dates. So that's one aspect of it. I wouldn't say it's necessarily an important aspect because I think we can still work within that timeline. I still think it's a few months out for kind of the final building permit process approval to kind of finalize those.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, for me, based on what the city attorney was saying, we're not saying that's the system that will go on. We're just saying we're okay with that property being issued a CUP for the possibility of putting that equipment on the roof. Did I understand that correctly?
I think that's correct, Madam Mayor. I mean, this CUP does require the city to follow the plans that were submitted with the application, which I presume are the plans that were part of the contract. What I'm saying is the property owner, though, as a city, you ultimately control what's going to go on there or not. So if there is a concern about the plans for the Muni, you have a number of options, even if you approve the CUP,
Right.
because it's city property.
Well, and for me, part of the discussion too with the Energy and Environment Committee, if I remember correctly, I mean, these are two large energy consumers, right? Between the refrigeration and the lighting and everything else. So, you know, we were looking at a way to also long-term preserve some of that money. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm in favor with the caveat that it is not impeding, that it's not creating an issue for the people up at Woodston, and that it is not a horrendous eyesore at ground level that is aesthetically pleasing, as much as a solar array can be aesthetically pleasing, but certainly not this jagged look about it that, from that example that we saw. And what would happen if they put it up and we were like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that's hideous? What recourse do we have?
None.
You want to move on?
Well, Madam Mayor, if, again, the city owns that property and can do with it whatever it wants, subject to things like needing a CUP for solar arrays. I think if the plans in the approved contract are followed by the contractor, we wouldn't necessarily have a recourse with them if they're in compliance with the contract. We could certainly, though, work with them on getting a system that meets the city's design requirements, aesthetic requirements. It might require more money. It might require revisiting the plans. I don't know. Nick and city manager would be better able to speak to that.
Madam Mayor, I would just maybe suggest, we typically wouldn't do this, but given the circumstances, a condition could be added that the final design of the Muni installations would go back to the council for review, and we could have a mock-up that shows the actual Muni roof with the, we could have them put together something that gives it the best depiction of how it's going to look. I'm a little worried about aesthetics is subjective, so I want to make sure that we're meeting the intent of the entire council. I don't know, based on the conversation here, that we would be able to do that without getting your approval at a subsequent meeting.
I agree. How does the council feel about that? Turn your mic on.
I'm just wondering if it really is going to be aesthetically pleasing at all, but it is subjective, you know? So, I mean, I would like to stand out front. Maybe I should have done that before we got in here, but, and, you know, really take a look at it. I don't know if we have a good picture of the Muni, but if I were up in Woodstead, I probably wouldn't appreciate it, you know?
There you go.
When did we,
Really
when
see
did we
it.
approve this?
Madam Mayor, I don't know the exact date. It was, I think, around the first of the
Yeah, it
around
was in January.
January?
Yeah.
time, yeah.
Okay. January of this year. Well, I mean, we approved it
Yeah.
as a council, so how do we want to move forward?
Vote, I guess.
Conditionally? Well, no, but do you want to put a condition on the Muni? I mean, all five of us were here for the original vote.
Yeah.
So to ensure that we move forward in a way that is representative of what we're looking to achieve, how I'm sensing hesitancy from you, Jeff, and from you, Kathy.
I would support, I think aesthetically, it's going to really change the look and feel of the building. And I think what you're asking, Mayor, if I'm hearing you correctly, is could we put a condition to say we'd like to see a true rendering of what it would look like?
Yes, and I'm not going to speak for staff, but the five of us agreed to something, and now I feel like we don't have full support, which we've gone, I mean, these were good things to talk about when we initially approved them.
I voted against it. That's my out. David's
Of course you did.
It's true. It's true.
Touche.
Well, we were in the middle of budgets, and it was a significant amount of money, and I was concerned
We'll
about the
grant you that one,
dollars.
Kathy. Good one.
It's 100% true. It was
Is the goal to get
a lot of money.
four or
I
five
forgot that.
people to vote, or to vote yes, or is the goal to just 3 out of 5?
Well, it only takes a simple majority, right? I mean, it only takes 3, but, I mean, this is a city project,
Yeah.
right? And I'd like to see Kathy's input on it, because this isn't a budget, this is a completely different.
It's done now.
It's done. I would like to see the council come up with, in staff, Energy and Environment Committee, this contractor, we've signed an agreement. I would like to see a constructive way to move forward that still meets the objectives that we had laid out. And so I like the suggestion, it's just a suggestion though, of a condition of approval that we come back, or maybe we table this one and you come back with some renderings and then we approve it.
We haven't heard anything from Wayzata, and that's a good thing. And maybe I'm just making this my thing. But I can support where we have a condition that we look at it and review the aesthetics of it.
Okay, all right. So would that be that we would, is it cleaner for us to maybe separate?
Madam Mayor, I think in light of this, if you're going to go down this road, you certainly want to separate the resolutions and vote on them separately. I think so it's really clear what the condition is attached to, and I think it would just be the second. And then I'd ask the city manager if he thinks that it makes more sense to just table action on that and bring back some plans and vote on it, or approve it with a condition that it's subject to further approval of council.
Yeah, it's a great question, because it's really not, it would.
I have an opinion on that. But.
Yeah, it would just be a, approval of the design, and there's not going to be any criteria there. It's basically, does the council feel comfortable with the design? So with that respect, I think the city attorney is going to agree with me. It's probably best to table it to meet your aesthetic concerns, and we can come back with more information.
I'd prefer that too.
Yeah.
That's just my 2 cents. Would the council be okay? Rest of the council?
Yeah, that's what makes everyone feel the most comfortable, but to be honest, I don't have a problem with it in the first place. I think like I said, we debated this, we voted on it, and the comp plan says we want to be at the forefront of sustainability. I frankly do think looking up and seeing solar on our city buildings does say something about us as a city, and I think that outweighs some of the aesthetic concerns, so.
Okay. Alex?
Well, I looked at this as 2 different resolutions anyway. I thought we were going to independently vote on them tonight. I didn't think they were wrapped into one. And I do see them as 2 different situations. I think Councilmember Parkhill brings up a good point. And it is a little bit ironic that we just went through all this stuff about solar and the zoning and task force and the different districts, that if this was not the Muni, if it was some other storefront or some other operation, we would probably be looking at this a little differently because it is viewable from the street. And we barred any solar on Lake Street for that very purpose. You could argue that this isn't exactly Lake Street, but it kind of is because you can see it across the parking lot. So you got the southern view, which we barred from on any building in Lake Street, but not this one apparently. And then the other concern is what the people at Widston, what are they going to view? And that's the north side. Well, you got the south side and the north side both having possible issues. So long story short, I think we do need to treat this separately and bring it back and debate it in some way.
No, I agree. I'd feel more comfortable if we could just get some renderings of what it's going to look like specifically on our building. So Photoshop it on there, whatever it may be, view from the street, view from Widston, if we can get that view. I think that we have to be particularly sensitive to that, to the extent that we can, right? In terms of realistic renderings and such.
So, Madam Mayor, I think the motion on that second resolution would be to table it and ask staff to bring it back with those renderings for consideration at a future meeting.
Fantastic. Okay. Everybody good with that?
Very
Excellent. All right, so we'll break this up. First motion is going to be to adopt Resolution 33, 2023, no, 34, 2023, approving a conditional use permit for municipal solar at 600 Rice Street East. Who would like to make that motion?
So moved.
In a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes. The second is to table adoption of Resolution 33-2023, approving a conditional use permit for municipal solar at 747 Mill Street East, and requesting staff to come back to council with renderings for their consideration. Someone care to make that motion?
So moved.
Excellent, thank you, Jeff. And a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes. All right, we have just a couple items left. The next one is to go back to item G on the consent agenda, and that is with regard to adoption of Resolution 31-2023, establishing a tree and plantings fund. Alex, you had mentioned you had concerns that we were collecting money for fees in lieu of tree plantings, and that those monies are now going to be used either for the removal of trees in public spaces or other plantings.
Right, I'll try to make this real simple. I'm basically in favor of all of it, except for bullet number 2, under the priorities for funds. And as I stated earlier, as the reasons why I wanted to pull it, is that if a developer or a resident has to pay us for trees because they can't plant on their property, it's basically paying us the money that would be used, that they would use to plant trees. It doesn't seem right to me that we would potentially use that money for maintenance or removal of trees when that's not what was being paid to us for in the first place. So I'm fine with the rest of it. I just feel like that one item ought to be removed from the priorities for funds, specifically where it says, and this is on page 92 of our packet, where it says maintenance or removal of trees on adjacent or nearby public properties or right-of-way. I would be happy if we just struck that one line.
I apologize, what page?
92 in our packet.
92, okay.
Madam Mayor, if I may.
Yeah,
So the action tonight is to consider the resolution that really just separates the funds. So I would just separate the two, the resolution and the action requested. What Councilmember Plekish is referring to is the policy that we utilize, which was adopted in October, that sets up a tiered system with how we utilize the funds that are received. We could take a look at that. I could respond to that as a part of this conversation, but just to be clear, the action tonight is just to separate funds.
okay. Well, thank you for the clarification.
And I have one other item on that, too.
Yeah, so we have the separation of funds. I think policy overall might be something, again, we want to revisit at a later time. Kathy?
Number 5, on the same page, page 92.
Okay.
Just really trying to understand what this is. It says, other similar activities that migrate the impact of tree removals on the subject property and fulfill the purpose and intent of the Wayzata Tree Preservation Ordinance. I guess I'm not clear on exactly what that statement is and what the outcome of it is, what you're trying to do with that.
So can we table that
Absolutely.
with review of the policy overall?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, if you want to have it as a part of the kind of the priorities from the zoning list, or is there a certain time you want to talk about that, or looking for more?
Not tonight.
Not tonight.
Sorry.
Well, what I would be happy to do is to respond in a Friday email about some of the intent of that, because there is good rationale. We still may want to make some amendments, but I'm happy to put together some more information and have you guys respond to me, and then we can ultimately put it back on the agenda if need be.
Yeah, it's hard to recall, but I mean, this policy is a newer policy, right? Because we didn't have the fees. So much like with any new policy, you know, when we first see it, we're like, oh yeah, that looks good. And then, you know, as circumstances arise and situations develop, we're like, oh, yeah, that doesn't work, right? So I think we're experiencing some of that with the tree preservation ordinance and some of the other things and all of these. So anything tree related, let's just put our arms around that and address together. 36 inches or more, heritage tree. Yeah. No, I think these are really good questions on policy, and let's tackle that but let's not wait too long.
So, Madam Mayor, do you want me to come back as I suggested, or do we want to kind of put it on as a key point to address, like at the beginning of next year when we can recap, you know, how it went this year, or what specifically would you like me to do? I think I can address a lot of the concerns just via my communication.
Oh, absolutely. Let's definitely start with that.
Okay.
If there are ongoing or additional concerns, I apologize. I have a screaming headache.
It's okay.
Last 2
Totally cool.
hours.
We can
But-
start there, and we can put it on the agenda quicker, or we can just wait till the end of the year,
Perfect.
depending on the responses to the communications I send out.
Fantastic. Does that work? And if there are ongoing questions, or if we need to dig in a little bit deeper, if it's, we certainly can do that.
Yeah,
Yes,
and-
City Attorney? Just-
There's always new agenda items every council meeting if council members feel they're not getting answers quickly enough and want to move it up on a priority so the council could consider it then.
Perfect. Thank you, David.
And
Kathy?
I was just going to say, I'm just looking for clarification as to what that statement truly means. And if I get that, then I think that's going to clarify it.
Yeah, and then Councilmember Plekish was looking for more removal of some language, or what we consider appropriate uses of those funds to be.
Right.
Okay. I think we're clear there. Did we make we're good on that item? No. We need to,
Hopefully, ask for a motion to adopt resolution number 31, 2023.
yes, thank you. Would someone care to make that motion?
Since I pulled it, I'd like to make that motion now.
Thank you, Alex. Would someone care to second it?
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries as well. That takes us to the city manager's report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll try to be brief here, but a few of these notes are important. One is I just would like to recognize National Police Week this week. Specifically, May 15th, that was also National Peace Officers Memorial Day, a day that we hold very close to our hearts here in Wayzata. National Police Week is a celebration and a way we honor our current police officers and the great work they do. And then, of course, the Memorial Day on the 15th. Not only does it kind of, meant to pay respects, homage to everybody, all police officers that have lost their lives, paid the ultimate sacrifice, but also our very own in Wayzata, the two officers, J.W. Anderson, who was killed in 1982, and then, of course, Officer Bill Matthews, who was killed 2017. I put up the picture of our memorial. It was today or yesterday on a beautiful day. The wreaths remembering our two beloved officers here. Just a remembrance, or just wanted to show it, just to note for the record that I know I speak on behalf of the entire council and community that we truly care and will never forget those officers, and they're within our hearts on a daily basis. A couple other things going on over the next week as well. We have Dig It Day, 8:30 on Saturday, 8:30 to 11 a.m. at Public Works. People can still sign up if they're interested in participating. It's a great event. Goes by pretty quick, and you really get to add like tangible value to the community, make it look pretty and nice. Hopefully the weather's nice, so go to our website to sign up. We also on Saturday have the Spring Splash. The Conservancy is leading the efforts on that one. It's our annual event that really promotes summer programming around the lake, the YMCA, Three Rivers, etc. We also have private groups like Mathnasium and Esteemed Dance will be there, and there's going to be another flash dance. So I hope you guys can participate in that if you're interested. Councilmember Blackish.
Don't hold your breath.
Oh, come on.
But thanks for the thought.
McCormick's will be there, slinging food and ice cream and whatnot. So
On the Panaway?
It is right on the Panaway. Yep. So don't forget about that. It's a fun event. It brings out a lot of kids. It's great. And then lastly, we have a Panaway open house on June 8th. That's what we're planning anyway, and that will be from 5 to 6:30. We will be sending out communication for that in the near future. That is just to talk about our logistics plan for the boardwalk that's going to start construction here in in a month, essentially. Our contractors will be there for that, just answering questions, talking about where things are going to go and when things are going to happen, a timeline. We still are solidifying the logistics plan, so I have nothing to add tonight, but that will be at that open house. And then further along, we're going to have it's not a groundbreaking. We're still trying to figure out what the appropriate title would be, but really celebrate the commencement of construction on the boardwalk, something that we've been working a long time on, probably late June, early July, after the site has been mobilized. So we'll obviously keep the council abreast of that and invite some key stakeholders as well. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. What time is that on June 8th?
I think the plan would be to try to hit folks, so it's not too late, but right after work, 5 to 6:30.
Okay.
And that's still, this is just within the past week. It's still tentative, so if there's any conflicts, please let me know.
I think it works. I have some other stuff in the morning, but that's
Cool.
exciting. Excellent. Yeah, Police Week, Memorial Week is it's a big one, and certainly our thanks to the folks that were out there working to make that look so beautiful. And it's one of our parks, and it's beautiful and has a lot of meaning. So thank you. I will not be at Dig It Day, unfortunately. I will be out of town, but it is a fun event. I don't know if other council members will be there.
I didn't know I had to sign up, so I will.
Oh, there you go. Well, I think
could
you
just show up.
I think you could show up with Jeff. Yes.
The Jeffs will.
Yes, the Jeffs will have it in good. You'll be in good company. So no, thank you very much. I'll be good. All right. Anything else for the good of the order? No. How about a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. We are adjourned.